Acceptance for His Omega, The Outcast Chronicles, Book 2, written by Krista Crown and Harper B. Cole, narrated by Kenneth Obi for Falcon Sound Company. Chapter 1, Dallas. The bar was unassuming as far as bars went around Nashville. In the last 10 years, maybe 20, the town had exploded with hipsters and musician wannabes. And not just country singers anymore, though it was still the holy city for aspiring country stars. Bars and restaurants came and went without so much as a how do you do. It wasn't my scene, so I'd watch from the outside. But this little bar, the Fox's Den, seemed much more my speed. Unfortunately, it seemed more the Skip's speed, too. We'd been tracking Emerson Womp for months now, almost a year off and on, but the coyote shifter was slippery. No surprise there. He was already on the line for 2 counts of aggravated arson, and Kurt had heard or seen whisperings, who knows how, that he was a possible suspect in 4 more cases since we started looking for him. It was aggravating. I hated letting a guy like him go free for so long. It was bad enough when it was some jerk who was skipping out on his child support payments, but knowing someone was out there possibly causing actual physical harm to people and I hadn't stopped him yet, the longer this went on, the more the case burned me, like a stubborn rash. Sadly, the little jobs were the easiest to wrap up. I took a deep breath, not for the last time, wishing I had a cigarette. But it had been almost 7 years since I'd smoked my last. I missed the way my body relaxed as soon as I took that first drag, but I didn't miss the jittery aggravation that came over me when I went a little too long between smokes. I didn't like ceding control of my body to anything out of my control, and an out-of-control bear was no good for anyone. It had been completely within my control to stop smoking, and so one day, I did it, cold turkey. It had been an ugly month. I probably could have picked a better time than Christmas. It was still early evening, just after the dinner rush, but before the evening crowd, I hoped. I didn't want to have to shout at the bartender. Fuck it. I was just wasting time. I hated this part of the job, talking to strangers. But you couldn't trust Simon or Kurt to do it. Ryan was good at it, but he was fucking intimidating. That was useful, but not for every situation. And Asher was basically on paternity leave. Even though baby Aspen was nearly 6 months old, he always volunteered for jobs, but none of us would hear of him taking too much time away from Aspen and Jesse. Even though I hated it, I was somehow good at it. Beats me how or why. The bar smelled of stale smoke, like lots of old hole-in-the-wall joints. Smoking in public buildings had become practically outlawed in the last few years, and as much as I hated anything that infringed on personal liberty, I was grateful I could walk into any restaurant and not be taunted with fresh smoke. There were maybe 6 other people in the bar right now, other than me, all scattered at tables and booths. Good. I wouldn't have to make awkward bar chat. I went directly to the bar. Surprisingly, over the stale smoke and beer and grease, there was a bright lemon scent. They must use some pretty strong cleaning products. But even that probably couldn't wash away the years of character. That was a plus in my book. The bartender was washing glasses, but he looked up as I sat down. "I'll be right with you," he said. "No rush," I said with a nod, taking the time to appreciate the view. The bartender was a short, slim fella with a shock of bright red hair. Freckles dusted his cheeks and nose, which only added to his youthful appearance. Yet he projected an air of confidence and experience that said he wasn't nearly as young as he looked. He finished up the glasses and dried his hands, coming over to lean on the bar in front of me. "So, what can I get you, big guy?" I couldn't answer, because now that he was directly in front of me, all I could process was that this man was a shifter, an Omega, and his scent was so bright and clear to me, I couldn't fathom how I hadn't noticed it before. It was that lemon, I realized. I'd dismissed his personal scent as cleaning supplies. I could tell the moment he realized what I was because the look in his eyes changed, giving me an up-down in a frank and approving appraisal. I remembered my manners and lifted my wrist for him to scent, but he glanced at the other customers, reminding me we were surrounded by humans. He took my hand instead, grazing our scent glands together. I resisted the urge to sniff my wrist, to inhale the mixture of our scents. "You're a fox," I blurted. "Well, thanks, sugar. You're not too bad yourself for a big old bear." He batted his eyes, purposefully mistaking my comment for the benefit of any listening humans. "What can I get you?" This time his tone was definitely suggestive, and I was tempted to ask him if I could order something off the menu. But I'd never been good at flirting, and I knew I'd just trip over the words and come out looking like an idiot. "Your cheapest draft, please." "Oh, and he's polite." The fox definitely had a mouth on him. I briefly contemplated what it would take to shut that mouth up. It had been a while since I'd taken any time to enjoy myself, and the fox was definitely my type. Business before pleasure, though. "What's your name?" I called down the bar. "Nick." "I'm Dallas." He hadn't asked, but I wanted him to know. As he handed me my beer with a flirty smile, I pushed a photo across the bar to him. "You recognize him?" Nick pursed his lips as he considered the photo. "Maybe." He dropped his voice so only a shifter could hear. "Coyote. Real slick guy. Comes in alone. Rarely leaves that way." He handed back the photo and I pocketed it. "I wouldn't know about that, but you're right on the money with Coyote." Nick grabbed a bar rag and began washing the already spotless space in front of me. He seemed like the kind of guy who had trouble staying still. "Why are you looking for him?" As much as I felt an immediate connection to Nick, with a compatibility level I'd rarely encountered, I wasn't tempted to tell him the truth. You never knew who you could actually trust. He skipped out on a debt. Nick didn't even try to hide his appraisal of me. "I don't envy anyone who thinks they can skip out on you for any reason." I smiled and took a long pull of my beer. "You know if he has any kind of schedule?" Nick shook his head. "He's definitely a later evening kind of guy. Like I said, he rarely leaves here alone." He shrugged. "Not my type. Too thin. I like a little more power." I chuckled and shook my head. "You don't look like you could handle too much power." There was no mistaking what Nick meant when he said, "You'd be surprised how much I can handle." I shifted uncomfortably in the seat, very easily imagining Nick handling what a bear like me could give him. Thankfully, Nick turned back to the subject of the skip. "He's been in pretty frequently the last couple weeks. Every 2 or 3 nights, I guess. He wasn't here last night, so chances are fairly good if you stick around, he'll show up." "You sure you want that? I don't think he'll take too kindly to me trying to collect. Things might get a little rough." A sly smile slid over Nick's face. "Oh, I wouldn't mind. I'd like to see how you handle yourself in a fight." A low rumble was building in my chest at Nick's teasing and innuendo. I washed it back with another sip of beer. "Maybe I'll stick around for a bit. You got food in this place?" Nick slid me a menu and I ordered a burger. "So, how come you're so knowledgeable about who comes and goes? You look a little young to be the owner." Nick laughed, a bright, clear sound that was much more innocent than he appeared. "No, but it's a family business. My uncle's the owner. I bartend almost every night." "Doesn't seem like that leaves a lot of room for fun. All work and no play." We both turned at a ding from the kitchen, and the waitress placed my burger at the end of the bar.
Don't worry about me.
Nick went to retrieve my food.
I get plenty of play. After work.
The invitation was clear, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it.
The night crowd doesn't start trickling in for another half hour or so,
Nick said.
If you want my recommendation for a lookout, the end of the bar over there by the restrooms is the best spot in the house.
He pointed out the exact spot I'd been considering if I was going to stick around.
And don't worry,
he said with a wink.
I won't forget about you in the corner.
Before I could say something embarrassing, I stuffed my mouth with burger. It was surprisingly good, almost enough to distract me from Nick. Almost, but not quite. When I finished, I took over the corner he had recommended. If Womp showed up tonight, well, that would be lucky. I liked the idea of finally closing this case. But if he didn't, well, maybe I'd get lucky.
Chapter 2. Nick. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't distracted by the big quiet alpha sitting quietly in my corner all night. It didn't help that Kit, my cousin, kept hissing at me that I'd better hit that or she would. Paws off, I hissed right back at her. Dibs. She sniffed. Have you licked him? I rolled my eyes at her reference to our childhood method of calling dibs. Does he look like someone who'd let you lick him just to claim him? She peered around me lustfully. Probably not, but I sure wouldn't mind trying. Shoo! After that, I couldn't get the idea of licking him out of my mind. Behind his ear, down his neck, his shoulder, his chest, lower. Dallas hadn't been wrong. I worked a lot, but I did play a lot to offset that. If I found most of my partners here while working, well, that was just making good use of a resource. I usually spent the evening weighing my choices, though. Not too drunk, not too sober, not too young, not too small. I did like my men big and bear like, even if they weren't actually bears. The fact that Dallas was one was yet another point in his favor, and the intensity of his sweet, woody maple scent intensified my desire to take him home with me. I was torn on whether I wanted the coyote to show up or not tonight. On one hand, it would be ridiculously hot to see Dallas take that jerk down a peg or two. The sleaze factor was strong with that one, and he was a shitty tipper. But on the other, I could really put that pent up aggression to good use. And make no mistake, Dallas was a ball of burning fire. On the surface, he was all honey and soft, cuddly teddy bear. But one thing bartending was good for was teaching you how to see beneath the surface. I didn't know whether Dallas knew it or not, but he was a volcano just bursting to unload. The idea of him unloading on me weakened my knees, and I closed my eyes until it passed. Hey, Nick, you working or sleeping? Justin, one of my regulars, yelled at me. Do you want a beer or do you want piss water? I yelled back at him. Bad idea to piss off your bartender. I joked back and forth with his crew for a few minutes, only glancing back at Dallas once I'd refreshed all their drinks. His soft blue eyes were on me, and he didn't flinch away when I caught him. Damn, that man was all alpha, and I was going to do whatever it took to get him in bed with me. Unfortunately, it was a busy night, and while I stopped by frequently to refill his glass, even after he switched to water, I was afraid every time I turned around that this would be the time when his seat would be empty. But every time, he was still there. I hoped he wasn't too disappointed that it appeared his coyote friend wasn't stopping by tonight. At last call, I approached him with a shot glass. What'll it be? Your choice. On the house.
What'll it take to get you to take it with me?
Well, I drawled, we'll definitely have to go top shelf, and you'll have to wait until we're officially closed. He tapped his thick fingers on the bar, drawing my attention and imagination to them.
Is that an invitation?
I gulped. It wasn't many men who could make me feel so off balance. But Dallas's quiet, unassuming demeanor over that core of heat and strength made me feel so twisted around I barely knew which way was up. That's definitely an invitation. He pushed his shot glass back.
Then I'll wait.
I dragged Kit into the back as soon as I could. Can you cover closing for me? She rolled her eyes upward. Duh. I've been planning on it since I saw you ogling over your hunky bear over there. I gave her a quick hug. I'd say I owed you one, but you still owe me from that Swedish god. Kit closed her eyes and shivered in remembered pleasure. So worth it. Now count your drawer and get out of here. There were definitely benefits to working in the family business. I counted my drawer and then handed everything over to Kit, swiping Aunt Joe's bottle of moonshine from behind the regular bottles of alcohol. We didn't sell it. It was the really good stuff, besides the fact that it wasn't actually legal. I poured 2 shots from the narrow-mouthed jar, smiling at Dallas's raised eyebrow.
What's this?
Drink first. I twisted the lid back on the moonshine and picked up my shot glass, tapping it to Dallas's before tapping it against the bar and downing it. Dallas hesitated before copying me, tapping his glass against the bar. He frowned at the glass.
That doesn't taste like there's any alcohol in it.
Oh, it'll jump up and bite you on the ass if you're not careful. Just about the best white lightning you'll find in the state of Tennessee.
But it tastes like strawberry.
Dallas protested. You complaining? I asked, grabbing my keys and stepping out from the bar.
Not at all.
He said, following me out the door.
It's just surprising.
I paused outside of the building, and Dallas slid his hand around my waist.
I hope your place is close, little fox, because all I've got is my little sedan, and I'd like to take my time with you. I'm not looking for a quick blowjob in the back of my car.
I slid my arm around his back and into his jeans pocket with a shiver, squeezing the tight muscle with a sense of anticipation. I hope you're not taking blowjobs off the table completely.
Not at all, little fox.
His voice was deep and rumbling, practically a growl. The sound went straight to my dick, which had been in a state of half attention ever since he walked in the door. Lucky for you, I'm terribly lazy, and I live right across the street. Dallas's eyes glinted with pleasure.
Convenient.
That was my thought, I agreed, and I led the way. I couldn't wait to see what was under Dallas's big leather jacket and tight pants. I wanted him to rub that big beard all over my body, scratch me all up with it. I wanted too many things for one night, but I was going to try and fit as many of them in tonight as possible.
Chapter 3. Dallas. Nick's apartment was much simpler than I expected. I had pinned him more as one of those guys who liked a lot of frills and decorations, but his style was much more modern, almost minimalist, but not that hard edge, all white kind of minimalist. There was a cozy, lived in feel to his apartment, and it was immaculate, no piles of papers lying around or books unshelved. This looks like a Pinterest staging area, I said before I thought better of the words, but it was too late. They rang in the air.
You did not just say that.
Nick's eyes glowed with glee.
That is so freaking cute.
I shrugged. I was man enough to admit I liked pretty things. What can I say? I'm into do-it-yourself. Nick took my hand with an evil grin.
I hope we can leave the DIY at the door tonight. I'm more interested in mutual projects.
I met his grin with one of my own. I think something could be arranged. His bedroom was just as spare and comfortable as the living room, except for the extra touch of luxury on his bed, a scarlet coverlet. I could already imagine it on my skin. Nick followed my eyes and pulled me further into the room, sitting on the bed.
Come here, big guy.
I approached the edge of the bed, bracketing his legs with mine, bending to kiss him. I could taste the strawberry moonshine still on his tongue. Combined with his lemon scent, I felt as if I were drinking a tall glass of strawberry lemonade on the hottest day of summer. I could sip on him forever. But his hands were distracting me, pushing my button down out of the way, untucking my t-shirt. And then his skin was on mine, tracing lines of fire everywhere they moved. And they didn't stop moving. It had been a while since I'd gone home with someone. I'd never been good at the flirting and subcontext required to show I was interested without coming on too strong. Nick had made it easy. He'd been open and overt without saying much outright. He was just the right combination of devil may care and interested that pulled me in, made me feel comfortable. We made quick work of each other's shirts. Nick was lean but muscled, the tendons of his neck standing out as he craned his chin upward when I knelt to lick a nipple. He collapsed backward on the bed and began shucking his pants. I followed his lead, and soon we were completely naked. More freckles dusted the rest of his body, and I wanted to follow their trails, connect the constellations of his body. Where I was hesitant, he was inquisitive, his hands caressing my muscles with a frantic eagerness. I was cautious, too aware of the difference in our sizes, afraid to press too hard, to squash him. I braced my elbows on either side of his shoulders, my knees between his legs, pressing down just enough that our bodies pressed and rubbed against each other, but not too much, until Nick growled in frustration and bit hard on my bicep. Human teeth only, but still, it hurt. What was that for? I asked. the beast deep inside me rising up, pushing to escape.
Stop holding back, he commanded. I can take it. You're not too much for me.
How can you possibly know that? I asked. You have no idea what I'm capable of.
I can see the fire deep in your eyes,
Nick said, still for once.
I know the beast that's inside you. You've locked him up, chained him down. But you don't have to with me. I want to be used. I want you to toss me around, to pin me down, to make me feel every inch of your strength.
The beast roared with need. He wanted all these things too. My control was fraying. A word, I growled.
What?
Give me a word. A word you'll only say if it's too much, if I need to pull back. If we don't have a word, I won't be able to stop.
A safe word?
Nick started to move underneath me, recognizing he was winning. He didn't know how close to the edge I truly was. Yes, a fucking safe word, Nick. Now.
Sassafras,
he said without further hesitation. I let my forehead drop to his. Good. Sassafras was the boundary. I had to make that clear before I let myself loose. Even then, I dared not let go all the way. Just a little. I took a few deep breaths, mentally preparing, thankful that Nick was keeping his sassy mouth shut for a moment. Finally, I opened my eyes. Are you ready? Nick nodded, his mouth opening for some smart-ass comment, I'm sure, but that nod opened the door. Before he could speak, I had already flipped him over onto his stomach. I hauled his ass into the air and pinned his shoulders down with one hand. Don't move, I growled before pulling back to settle on my heels. His legs were still between mine, and I spread them for a better angle, arranging him just so before pushing on his lower back, his ass presenting his dusky hole high in the air. Good boy. Nick whimpered, feeding my need to claim him. I hadn't been expecting this eager willingness to be dominated. No, it was a need for Nick, not just a desire. A need that complemented my own. I couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to completely let loose on him, but that was too tempting a thought. I spread his cheeks, stretching his hole, which was already glistening with slick. I was going to claim that hole tonight, but not yet. I bent down and licked a stripe up his crack from his balls to his hole, simply gliding over. I did it again and again. Nick whimpered and twitched his hips back. I'd been waiting for him to move. I knew it was nearly impossible for this man to stay still. I gave him a sharp, quick warning swat, just hard enough to redden his ass. He gasped, and a pulse of slick escaped his ass. Damn. How wet must he be inside if he was able to do that with his hole practically straight up in the air? I wanted to find out. I plunged a finger straight in, using only the slick his body provided to guide me. The moan he let out shocked me to my core. If he was in pain, he didn't show it. That moan had been pure pleasure. How would he take it if I just took him right now? Dove right in with no prep. The thought made my cock twitch. I wanted that. But I wanted this to last longer than just a couple minutes. I had never been with anyone so responsive, so needy, so perfect. I thrust my finger into him several times, prompting more moans, and another twitch of his hips. I slapped the other cheek with my free hand, feeling his muscles clench around my finger and then melt. Hell, I wanted to feel that again. So I slapped him once more, rubbing the sting away with my free hand, feeling the heat of his skin as blood rose to the surface, and that same tight clench and relaxation around my finger. I pulled my finger out, wet with his slick, and leaned forward to press it against his lips. Taste yourself, I commanded. Nick responded eagerly, opening his mouth and sucking my finger down to its base. His lips looked so pretty wrapped around my finger, his eyes focused on mine as he twirled his tongue around, licking every last drop of his slick from my skin, both of us imagining what it would be like to have his mouth on my cock. I couldn't see anything else now that the image was in front of me. Stay. I grabbed the pillows from the top of the bed and threw all but one of them to the ground. I slid in front of him, pleased that he didn't move, though his eyes strained to watch me. I propped the pillow behind me and rested my balls on the top of his head. You can move now. Let's see you put that mouth to use. Immediately, Nick was on my cock, not even bothering with any preliminaries before taking me all the way down to my root, his throat swallowing around the head of my cock. It was amazing, but too much. I grabbed his hair and pulled him back, but not off. Slowly, boy. Take your time. Instead of releasing his hair, I used my grip to guide him, sliding him slowly up and down my cock. I could feel when he loosened his neck and shoulders, giving control of them over to me. But his mouth didn't stop, his tongue flexing and swirling, his mouth tight, sucking. Fuck. I didn't know it was possible for someone to be as willingly submissive as Nick. I returned control to Nick after a few minutes, reaching forward to press as far down his back as I could, encouraging him to arch his back and show off that pert ass. I let the fingers of one hand rest in his hair, a sense of restfulness creeping through my limbs, calming the beast in a way no one had ever done before. That only lasted until Nick swallowed me to the root again, somehow managing to get his lips over the bulge of my soft knot. I nearly came from the clench of his throat on my cock and the sight of his spit-wet lips spread so wide. This time I pulled him all the way off. You're just determined to be naughty, aren't you?
Maybe,
Nick said with a smile. I took his chin in my firm grip and his eyes rolled back as he swayed toward me. Is that how you answer me?
Yes, sir. I'm very naughty.
Nick was drawing reactions from me I'd never experienced before. With him, I'd let the beast out further than I ever had, and he willingly accepted me. It made me feel like I was floating on clouds, yet dredging pieces of me from the darkest depths of my soul. It was exhilarating. It was terrifying. I couldn't handle the look of need and peace in his eyes anymore. It made me want too much. It made me want things I couldn't have. This was a one-time thing with Nick. Maybe he was okay with this for a night, but surely he wouldn't want this forever. My thoughts were running and tripping over each other. With a sudden blur of motion, I had him flipped again, on his knees in the other direction, his ass before me. I lifted his hips and spread his legs to bracket mine. He was pretty much in the same position as before, but I pulled his hips lower. His hole was clenching as if he knew exactly what was happening next. I ran a finger over his hole, realizing I'd been so caught up in the moment I'd nearly started fucking him without a condom. I took several deep breaths. Nick, we need a condom. Normally, I would have hated interrupting the flow of the moment, but this time I was grateful for it. I needed to disengage a little.
Nightstand. Drawer.
His voice was soft and breathy, and he didn't move a muscle as I leaned over to open up the drawer. There was a box there, but it was empty. Looks like you're out. Do you have a backup stash?
Huh?
Nick's voice was a little clearer, as if he were coming back to reality too.
Fuck. No.
I let out a shaky breath. My need to claim Nick this way was intense, and I needed the anonymity of not looking into his eyes right now. His eyes that drew me too far in, too deep. He made everything too real, but I would deal. We'll just have to skip this then. I dragged a finger down his crack and he groaned.
Just pull out.
Fuck. I closed my eyes as all my blood rushed south to my dick. I don't know if that's a good idea.
Dallas, I need you in me. Please?
It was the please that did me in. I took my cock in hand and pressed it to his hole before I quite realized that my decision had been made. Slick was everywhere, and I wasted no time sliding right in, his hole beyond tight around my cock. He moaned louder than he had when I had thrust in my finger, thrusting himself back onto me as if he were hungry to feel every possible inch as soon as possible. He stripped my worries away when I bottomed out, and he began fucking himself on me, his pretty hole taking my thick cock eagerly. I reached forward to wrap my hand around his neck to slow him down. You're so impatient, I growled. Then, just like I had used my grip on his hair to guide his mouth, I used my grip on his neck to guide his ass, to let me thrust into him, to control the depth, the angle, the force. I wanted to see how long he could last, and I went slow, slow and steady, twitching my hips that last inch to slap my hips to his thighs, then sliding slowly out again. His arms began to shake, so I slipped my free arm around his chest under his arms, but that didn't stop the shaking. I could feel his entire body tense as he went silent, knowing the end was coming. And then his entire body seized up, and I pulled him back against my chest so I could watch his cock twitch as he shot spurts of cum under those pretty satin sheets, though it was difficult to keep my eyes open as he squeezed around my cock. I held us as still as I possibly could, so close to coming myself, but it was as if he was determined to milk my cum out of me, his body continuing to spasm long after I thought possible. I pulled from him with a sudden jerk, not knowing if I would make it in time. Nick fell forward onto the bed, and I thrust 2 fingers in his now loose hole as I jerked myself to completion, painting his freckled back with my cum, his channel still squeezing around my fingers. I pressed my fingers in as far as I could, pressing my fist up against his body. It wasn't a knot, but it was the best I could do. When his body finally stilled, I pulled away and settled next to him, but he was already asleep. Not that I could blame him. I forced myself to get up and grab a cloth to clean us both, then lifted the little Omega and pulled him into my arms as I pulled the blanket up around us and drifted to sleep myself. Nick was still asleep when I woke the next morning. I was surprised. I hadn't actually planned on staying the night. I had stayed up later than normal waiting for Nick to get off work, though, and Nick himself had drawn more emotion and thoughts from me in one night than I normally had to deal with in a year. I quietly got dressed, but I couldn't leave just like that. I sat next to Nick and brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. He blinked up in confusion at me, then smiled, an unconscious gesture that went straight to my soul.
Hey, sexy,
He mumbled. Hey yourself. Nick stretched, rolling over to reveal his naked body, unashamed and completely aware of my attention.
You ready for round 2?
I chuckled. I wish, but I've got to get to work. I leaned down to kiss him. Maybe it wasn't the best idea, but I needed one last taste of him. I left my card on your kitchen counter. You'll call me if that guy shows up, won't you?
Sure. You sure I can't tempt you to stay a little longer?
Nick looked so innocent in his half-asleep state, emphasizing the differences between us. I couldn't stay, not when I wanted to so badly. No matter how responsive he'd been last night, I couldn't unleash all of what I was on him. It wouldn't be fair to him. He was light and I was dark. He was delicate and I was rough. He needed someone who didn't have the ragged edges of darkness I'd carried my entire life. I wish, but I've got to head out. You should get some more sleep, yeah?
Yes, sir,
He said, giving a mocking salute. I pulled the covers back over him and left without looking back, no matter how badly I wanted to.
Chapter 4. Nick. I found myself playing with Dallas's business card again during the lull before dinner, just after I'd come on shift. I'd never had such a hard time shaking a man from my system, but one night, and Dallas seemed to have poisoned me for just about anyone else. It had been a month, and I'd turned down every offer, even from fuck buddies who I always enjoyed spending time with. No one sparked my interest the way he had. Just call him already, Kit complained, crashing down a tray of clean glasses. Hey, careful with that. I don't want to be picking glass out of my clothes for a week. Kit's dad, Uncle Toby, came from out back then, and we quickly turned to putting the glasses away. Why won't you call him? You've been mooning over him for weeks. It was a fling, nothing more. He only gave me his card for if that coyote dude came back. Surprisingly, he hadn't. I couldn't help but wonder if he'd gotten wind of Dallas looking for him. The coyote seemed like the type to cut and run. This was insane. I was mooning over a guy I'd slept with once. Enough was enough. Before I could change my mind, I marched over to the trash and threw the card in. What are you doing? Kid hissed, letting go. I blocked her from going after the card. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Tonight, I'm going to get laid, and I'm going to forget all about Dallas. Kit's eyes were big and wary. Are you sure? I nodded firmly. Absolutely. I was anything but. Keep an eye out for me. No bears, though, shifter or human. I didn't want anyone who reminded me of Dallas. Kit gave me another skeptical glance, but took the empty tray back to the kitchen without a word. I shook my hands and rolled my head, trying to jazz myself up. Despite my words to Kit, hooking up with someone was one of the last things I felt like doing right now. I was determined to break Dallas's spell, though. And if that meant hooking up with a new guy every day this week, so be it. My shake Dallas out of my system plan took a hard turn to the south during dinner. After working years at the bar, the scent of grease and frying food didn't even register most days. But for some reason, tonight, it was turning my stomach over something fierce. Is that look of nausea from the wrinkly Kardashian wannabe who keeps eyeing you like a fresh cream puff? Because, ew, I couldn't add to Kit's assessment like I normally would because I was too busy concentrating on not throwing up, unsuccessfully. I shoved her out of the way as I sprinted to the staff bathroom before losing the contents of my stomach. Kit was hard on my heels. Dude! I collapsed against the bathroom wall, my face cold with sweat. On a 10-point scale? I'd give that an 11 in grossness. You didn't make yourself sick just so you could get out of this stupid sleeping with a random stranger quest you put yourself on, right? My eyes felt closed, feeling as though weights were hanging from my lashes. I think this is food poisoning or a stomach bug. Then you sure as shit aren't going back out into the woods, Typhoid Mary. Home and bed for you. Dr. Kit's orders. Home and bed sounded amazing. You sure? I croaked. Kit waved an airy hand. I'll find someone to cover for you. Do you need me to walk you home? I forced myself to stand up, gripping tightly to the handicap railing. Don't you worry about me, I said. I'm going to curl up in bed with a mug of tea and sleep through as much of this as possible. I have a feeling it's a 24-hour bug. I'll probably feel better tomorrow. Well, don't plan on coming back to work until Saturday. Keep your germs away from here. I'm already going to have to Lysol everything you touched. Okay, I'll get out of here before I turn the area into a biohazard. I stumbled a little as I pushed past Kit. You're really, really certain about that? I patted her cheek lightly. I'm fine, baby Kit. I'll tell you what, you can come check on me in the morning. Maybe bring some of your mom's chicken soup? She pushed my hand away. Stop calling me that. I'm not a baby anymore. I'm not even the baby anymore with all the babies running around the den. Don't lie. You love being the baby. Kit tossed her hair over her shoulder. Only when it suits me. Now go. I'll call Carson. I'll see you tomorrow. Carson was a good choice. He wouldn't get overwhelmed if things got too busy. I didn't even make a token offer to stay until he arrived. I was already wiped out, and what little energy I had remaining was rapidly declining. I threw up twice more, once over the stairs up to my apartment into the alley, and again as soon as I unlocked the door, rushing to the kitchen sink. I hadn't even been able to make it to the bathroom. Afterwards, I collapsed on my bed and slept like the dead. I woke slowly to a pounding in my head. It was incessant, and then a voice started yelling at me. It took me a while to realize both the pounding and yelling were coming from outside my head. In fact, they were coming from outside my apartment. They stopped, giving me a moment of relief before my phone buzzed on my nightstand. I fumbled for it, managed to knock it on the floor, and then managed to slide off my bed with a thump when I tried to reach for it without moving too much. Hello, I grumbled when I finally grabbed it and answered it. You really should give me a key if you're going to tell me to come over and check on you. Even in my half-awake state, maybe especially in my half-awake state, I shuddered at the idea of giving my cousin free rein to my apartment. I'll be right there. Don't bother. I heard the click of my front door, and a few seconds later, Kit was standing over me, and the call ended. You're a mess, she pronounced. I'm sick and asleep. She grabbed my hand and helped me to my feet. Well, let's get you tucked in and then I'll warm you up a mug of soup. I let her fix my covers, but drew the line at letting her literally tuck me in. My brain was slowly booting up, but my stomach was still uneasy. How did you get in anyway? I called to her. I didn't have to yell, thankfully. The apartment was small enough she could hear me from the other room. Jimmy the lock. We really need to put a deadbolt on that door. I'm surprised you've never been broken into. I'm just a lucky fox. The chicken soup smelled amazing, and I realized I was hungry. I couldn't remember eating since lunch the day before. Here we are. Kit brought 2 mugs of soup, one for each of us, and I scooted up to sit, taking it from her gratefully. I buried my nose in the steam. No one makes comfort food like Aunt Dory. Don't let your mama hear you say that, Kit cautioned as she took a sip. I shook my head. She's the one who says she couldn't cook her way out of a paper bag. I've always thought that was such a strange expression. Why would you want to cook your way out of a paper bag? Kit climbed up the bed and leaned against the headboard next to me. I don't know, but if Mom tried, the paper bag would catch on fire. How did Carson do? Not bad. He mixed up a Kentucky Mule and an old-fashioned, but who in their right mind orders complicated drinks outside of dinner time? Chicks, I teased, leaning over to bump her shoulder with mine. Oh no. My stomach rose up in protest. That was a bad idea. Nick, you okay? I was trying to push the nausea down, but it kept growing. I clamped my lips shut and scrambled to set down my mug and make it to the bathroom in time. I only just made it, losing what little soup I'd managed to get down so far, but mostly dry heaving, my stomach still empty from the day before. Kit turned the sink on behind me and was waiting with a cool cloth when I sat back. Was it a rough night? I took the cloth and pressed it to my forehead. I threw up a few times right when I got in, but then I collapsed in bed and didn't get up until you got here. Kit patted my arm. Wait just a minute. Like I was going anywhere. When she came back, she thrust a box in my hands. I blinked at it a few times, not understanding what she had just handed to me. What's this? It's a pregnancy test, she said slowly. You're pregnant? I exclaimed. Kit rolled her eyes. No, asshole, it's for you. Why would I need a pregnancy test? Kit slid her back down the wall across from me, nailing me with a look. Why does anyone need a pregnancy test? I tossed it back at her, pressing the cloth against my eyes. I always use protection. Always? Of course. What kind of idiot? Except for the one time when I didn't, because Dallas pulled out. Kit tossed the test back to me as the cloth fell from my eyes. Exactly. I've been wondering for about a week now, so take it. She closed the door behind her. She stood and left me alone with my thoughts. And the test. Surely not. It was such a minor chance. He'd pulled out well before he came. Okay, a few seconds. But that should have been enough, right? There was no way I was pregnant. I'd take the test and prove Kit wrong. A few minutes later, I was staring at the positive double lines. Kit knocked and I went to the door. She took the test from my hands and then pulled me into a hug. I gotta find his number, I said, remembering with sudden and sinking clarity that I had tossed Dallas's card into the trash. Kit pulled back, understanding dawning on her face. Oh, shit. It's pickup day. We've got to go now. I scurried to throw on some shoes, still in my clothes from the night before, and held the nausea back with my sense of urgency. We rushed across the street and behind the bar to the dumpsters. I slid the door of the giant bin open with a bang. Empty. With any hope of contacting Dallas gone, the nausea overcame me once more. Once I finished retching, Kit took me back to my apartment and called in sick for me for the rest of the week. My mind was a jumbled pile of emotions. I was pregnant, a single omega with no way of contacting the alpha who had knocked me up. I never thought I'd become a statistic. I had no idea what this changed, or how I needed to face it. Kit bundled me up on the couch and turned on Netflix, taking care of me without being overbearing. I didn't have to figure everything out today, I realized. Today, I could pretend the world was normal and binge watch television to carry my mind away. Tomorrow, I could start making a plan. Chapter 5. Dallas.
I wasn't quite sure how I'd gotten stuck with decorating duty the day after Thanksgiving, but at 9 in the morning, I found myself holding a giant pile of fake pine garland, following my alpha's mate around like a pup while his actual pup watched us with fascination from her playpen. I wasn't upset about the decorating, really. It would be hypocritical of me to even pretend. I was the one who had introduced Jesse to Pinterest after all. Even though he'd gone pin crazy, he still had a ways to go before his boards caught up to mine. I was more grumbly about the fact that all the other men in the house seemed to have escaped it. I was in just as much of a post-Thanksgiving food hangover as anyone else. But this was Aspen's first Christmas. It needed to be perfect. Do you think we'll be able to get the guys out of bed for tree hunting? We placed the last of the garland and turned to a box of equally fake red berries.
I can guarantee Asher will be up,
Jesse said with a gleeful smirk.
He is not missing his daughter's first Christmas tree.
Sadly, even though Jesse had started us canvassing the property since August, there were no decent evergreen trees. They were there, but too big or too scraggly. We were making plans to start our own little Christmas tree plot for the future, though. It just didn't seem right going to a stand and picking out something already cut down. We hadn't bothered with much beyond small gifts last year. We had been so busy working on Asher and Jesse's house. That was our only option this year, though, and probably for a few more. Hopefully, our plot would be ready by the time Aspen really started building her long-term memories. She yelled something at us in her incomprehensible baby jabber, and Jessie turned with a smile.
What is it, baby girl? You getting bored?
Her face split into a giant toothy grin, melting my heart. Jessie picked her up and bounced her on his hip.
You hungry?
She shook her head no, which was the only answer she knew, so it wasn't exactly a reliable barometer.
Okay, precious, let's get you some blueberries.
I'll take her while you get that ready. I held out my hands, and Aspen immediately tried to launch out of her dad's arms. He was well practiced in her acrobatics, though, and had her righted in a moment.
I guess that answers that,
Jessie laughed.
I'll drag in her high chair and she can eat while we finish up for the morning. Have to leave a few things for the other guys.
He handed Aspen to me, and I pretended to stumble under her weight. You must have gained 5 pounds overnight, little girl. I swear, she grows when we're not looking.
No kidding, Jessie called from the kitchen. There's mornings I pick her up and she just doesn't fit anymore, and I have to adjust how I'm used to carrying her.
Aspen buried her hands in my beard and laughed at its scratchiness. I tickled her face with it, and she shrieked in delight. That's a good morning greeting, Asher said as he came down the stairs. Aspen turned at her father's voice and smiled, burying her face against my chest in happiness. You look good. When are you going to find someone and start working on making some playmates for Aspen? I'm just fine being the doting uncle, I said, trying to brush off his comment like I always did. It wasn't that I didn't want a family, a mate and babies. I did. But I doubted there was anyone out there who could put up with the true me, the beast buried under layers of control. The image of a willing and compliant fox flashed through my mind, and I pushed it away. Again. Asher took Aspen from me, tossing her up in the air, drawing an even larger smile from her and the most beautiful rippling giggle.
You better not be throwing my baby around,
Jessie warned from the kitchen, appearing a moment later with Aspen's high chair and a bowl of blueberries. Asher and I shared sheepish looks while I took the high chair from Jessie and unfolded it so Asher could set her down.
You're just in time,
Jessie said, his eyes glinting with a calculating gleam. Asher didn't try to fight the inevitable, dropping a kiss on top of his mate's head. At least let me get a cup of coffee first. Dallas, you made coffee, right? Of course. Jesse's aversion to coffee was so strong he wouldn't even make it for his mate, no matter how much the rest of us required it to function on a daily basis. Good man. He patted my shoulder as he passed me, and I couldn't help but realize how much he'd grown in the last year. He'd always been a leader, but ever since his pack had made him choose between them and his mate, and we'd followed him, his teammates, now pack members. It was as if he'd finally started to fill out his own skin. I'd grown up in a den, unlike Kurt and Jesse, who'd been raised as loners. Until Asher hired me, I'd floated from job to job, not staying long enough to put down roots, always moving on when the beast started to latch on to the day-to-day annoyances of life, fighting him would change. I hadn't planned on joining a new den, certainly not such a ragtag group of outcasts as this pack. Maybe it was because I had gotten older. Maybe I had more control of the beast inside. Or maybe it was simply that Asher was meant to be a leader, and the beast respected that. Whatever it was, I was grateful to have found this chosen family, to have found a place where I could find some rest.
Chapter 6. Nick. Deep breaths, okay? Kit said as we stood outside her parents' house for the traditional lunch after Thanksgiving leftover feast. It wasn't enough that the entire clan had spent all day together the day before. No. Thanksgiving was a 2-day holiday for the Monroes. By day 2 of turkey and mashed potatoes, everyone was generally completely mellowed out, and I figured it was the safest time to finally tell them about my pregnancy. I'd been avoiding everyone for the last 2 months because the scent was too distinct if you knew what you were looking for, and my family was very familiar with pregnancies. The scent of food and so many people should cover things up long enough for me to share my news on my own terms. We're just a little late, so the mimosas should have already made their rounds. I'll slip in and pour you a flute of orange juice so no one latches on right away. Once the uncles go back for seconds, that's when you'll tell them. Don't chicken out and wait too long, though, or we'll interrupt their TV time and it'll cause an even bigger uproar. Stop. I know, I got it. We've been planning this for weeks. I knew Kit was just repeating the plan to calm herself, but it was making me edgy. I felt like an ass when her face fell, though, and I pulled her in for a hug. I'm sorry. I'm just nervous. Me too, she admitted. Her fresh thyme beta scent was soothing. Kit had been there every day of the last 2 months. She'd been with me 2 weeks ago when her cousin, from her mom's side of the family, who was a midwife, saw me for my first pregnancy visit. I'd been surprised that she had an ultrasound, and even more so when she printed out pictures for me. They were tucked into my pocket even now. I couldn't stop looking at them. It made everything seem more real. Not that the last 2 months of near constant nausea hadn't felt real enough. I'd had to quit work and avoid more concerned inquiries from the family than I could count. But the nausea had waned in the last few weeks, and I'd gotten through Thanksgiving without any incidents. Okay, I said, letting her go. On the count of 3. 1, 2. She turned the handle and pushed the door open to chaos. One more deep breath and we dove in. Our plan to arrive in the middle of things was strategic. Any earlier, and I wouldn't have been able to avoid the numerous Bloody Mary and mimosa-fueled toasts. We split, me to scope out the best position so that I could make sure everyone heard me, and Kit to grab drinks for us before anyone else could offer. Kit had been against announcing it to everyone at once. Her argument was that it would cause less of an uproar if I just told 1 or 2 people at a time. She was completely right, but I couldn't handle the thought of going through this stress over and over again, even if it was on a smaller scale. I wanted it one and done. I slid into the melee, keeping an eye on her in the kitchen through the breakfast bar. Did you hear Kara and Tom are finally pregnant? One aunt was gossiping to another. Molly, Kara said they didn't want to tell everyone yet, another aunt admonished. Aunt Molly sniffed. This isn't everyone. Jackie and her crew couldn't make it because Sarah got sick and Lionel's still in the hospital. The admonishing aunt, I couldn't see her, just hear her, seemed to find this a fair enough answer, but wasn't willing to admit defeat. Well, it's just not done to mention their difficulties. The general hubbub faded a little, attention turning to the aunts. Difficulties? Did I mention their difficulties? You're the one who's bringing it up. I turned away with a hidden smile. Maybe my announcement wouldn't be the biggest news of the evening. No sooner had I thought those words than I heard Uncle Toby's boisterous voice carry over even the aunt's argument. What are you pouring just a straight glass of orange juice for? Have some champagne. You're not pregnant, are you? His loud laugh trailed off into awkward silence as she froze, her eyes flying to mine. You're pregnant? His incredulous statement cut through the noise, and everyone began to turn around to see what was going on. Kit's eyes begged me to say something. I moved my lips, but no sound was coming out. Who was it? Uncle Toby demanded. Tell me now, and I'll rip him limb from limb. I thought you were better than that, Kit. Thought you knew better than to let some fool with a sly smile and a kiss have his way and then leave. His words stung, mostly because that's exactly what I had done. Kit tore her eyes away from me and pressed her lips together, her eyes flashing in anger. Uh-oh. I knew that look. It was the look Annie Monroe got right before the gloves were about to come off. I pushed forward, struggling to reach Kit through the crowd, my voice still inconveniently missing. First off, Dad, I'm not pregnant. And even if I was, what of it? It's my body, my choice. It's my say what to do with it. Red crept up Uncle Toby's neck. Not while under my roof. I finally reached Kit and grabbed her hand, pulling her behind me, hopefully out of his wrath, and I finally found my voice. It's me that's pregnant, not her. There was a murmur of surprise from the rest of the family, but Kit shoved me out of the way and got up in her father's face. If that's the way it is, then, I certainly don't need to live under your roof anymore. Uncle Toby's mouth gaped for a moment, and then he really let loose. No daughter of mine is going to live like some hussy. You'll live under my roof until you've found an acceptable mate who can take care of you and keep your wild ways in hand. I didn't need to see Kit's flashing eyes or the set of her mouth to know that was the exact wrong thing to say to her. She tossed her hair over her shoulder, uncrossed her arms, leaned forward, and said, Watch me. She grabbed my arm and dragged me out the door after her. Well, she said when we were a couple blocks down the street, I think that went rather well, all things considered. Kit, you just basically disowned yourself all over the imaginary problem of you being pregnant, which you aren't. She relaxed her grip on my arm and linked hers with mine. Oh, it's been a while coming. We've been arguing about me finding a mate for 6 months. I've been stashing stuff at Carol's for whenever it happened. He's determined to see me mated off, and I'm just as determined to do nothing of the sort. Were you planning on picking a fight with him to distract everyone? The wind changed directions, blowing directly at us and cutting through my shirt. I shivered and zipped up my coat. No, but if I thought of it, I might have. The timing is a little problematic since I don't exactly have a place to stay lined up. But I'll manage. It took me no time at all to figure out the perfect solution. You'll stay with me, of course. Kit shook her head. Your couch is nice and all, Nick, but I really do need my own space, and on the cheap. I kind of doubt I have a job after that blow-up. We'll find a new place together. My lease is up at the end of January. We both need new jobs, and I doubt either of us wants to be that close to the bar after this whole fiasco. What do you say? I tugged on her arm excitedly. Kit smiled. You're just doing this so I'm around to feed you more often and to help change diapers, aren't you? I laughed. Not going to lie. Those sound like amazing side benefits. I'll think on it, Kit promised. The answer is probably yes, but I don't want to rush into anything yet. Again. I threw an arm around her. It's going to be great, I promise. And we'll go pick your stuff up from Carol's this afternoon.
Chapter 7. Dallas. Our schedule had changed a lot since our loner days, working as a team, but not as a pack. Before, we all pretty much went our own way until Asher called us up with a job. Now, we woke up, went about our separate morning routines, and then met in the double-wide's living room, going over the priorities for both bounties and the pack. Bounty-wise, we tried not to call it that in front of Asher. He was pretty stuck on being all proper about it. Bail retrieval. Bounty-wise, we took fewer jobs these days. None of us had rent, and a lot of our time was better spent investing in the pack. This last spring, we'd planted a large garden, tended it through summer, harvested it in the fall. We'd built a second house, and that had gone to Ryan. He was bigger than even me, and the small dimensions of the double wide had squeezed him, even though he'd never complained. But the bounty money was helpful, and sometimes we took on jobs just on principle, or ones we'd been chasing for a while. None of us liked feeling like we'd left a job undone. Jesse had claimed nearly the entire week after Thanksgiving for decorating, but now it was time to get back to business. Simon was just sitting down with a bowl full of cereal when Asher and Ryan arrived. They didn't bother knocking. There was no need. Asher carried a giant thermos, but Ryan helped himself to the coffee. It always took him a while. He doctored it up with so much milk and sugar. I wonder why he even bothered with the coffee part. I was pretty sure the instant flavored stuff would have suited him just fine. As soon as we all settled into our seats, Asher began. Okay, what's on the agenda today? Kurt tossed a packet onto the table. Another lead popped up on our arsonist. The cops haven't connected his name yet, but I don't think it will take him long. A fire out in East Tennessee that has his trademark. I decided to give the whole file another look a couple weeks ago to see if I could figure out some predictors, and I discovered something interesting. He leaned forward to open the file and flipped through a couple papers until he landed on the one he wanted. I can't say with complete certainty, but I'm pretty sure our guy is targeting shifters. All families, all with children, all with at least one set of remains the investigators couldn't find. The children? Asher asked sharply. Kurt nodded. Asher's tension filtered through our connection. Not that I wasn't already on edge from Kurt's revelations. I want to up the priority on this. Let's revisit all our previous leads. I want you to split up, cover ground fast. I don't want him to have enough warning to just keep running ahead of us if he is returning to any of his old haunts. Simon, you take the house up in Smith County. Ryan, head up with him and ask around town. Dallas, there was a bar he used to go to, right? The Fox's Den, yeah. I hoped no one could sense my nervous anticipation. Well, no one other than Asher. He gave me a questioning look, but let it go when I shook my head. I wasn't sad about having an excuse to see Nick again, if he remembered me. I had liked to think he would, but I didn't want to be disappointed. I guess I'd just find out. The Fox's Den hadn't changed a bit in the 3 months. Maybe it looked a little dirty in the grimy gray of December, but that didn't affect its facade much. I waited until the sun had started to go down before I even left home. Nick was an evening bartender. It followed that my best bet, if I hoped to see him, would be at night. The beast within me perked in interest, and I didn't pull him back as tightly as I normally would. I had never felt freer and more myself than that night with Nick. Maybe I was being overeager, hoping for a repeat. The bar was a little busier than when I'd arrived the time before, but still calm. The stale cigarette and beer smell was the same. The bar gleamed the same, but the bartender was definitely not the same.
Can I help you?
The bartender was redheaded, like Nick, freckled like Nick, small and thin like Nick, but it was definitely not Nick. For one, he was a beta, and he was nowhere near as enchanting as Nick. He was missing something, a spark, though there was a strong resemblance. Maybe a brother or a cousin. Is Nick not working tonight? The bartender glanced to the kitchen, and I followed his gaze but saw nothing.
Nick doesn't work here anymore.
The disappointment was like a brick wall. Oh? He said this was a family business. He didn't seem like he was interested in moving on. Where's he working now? The bartender's eyes darted.
I really couldn't say.
His eyes latched on something and he started scrubbing the bar furiously. I followed his gaze, and this time I noticed an older man, definitely a relation, probably the uncle Nick had been talking about. That pulled some pieces together. Some kind of family rift, perhaps. That's fine, I said, pulling out the photo of Womp that I'd stuck in my wallet after that morning. I didn't want to be caught without it, now that the case was taking more priority. You seen this guy around at all? The bartender took a close look at the photo, but handed it back with a shrug. No,
Sorry, man.
I stuck the photo back in place. Thanks anyway. Have a good night. The air stung my face as I stepped out of the bar and let the door close behind me. 2 months ago, Nick had lived right across the street. Did he still? He hadn't said anything about the apartment being tied to the job or the family. I should just get back in my car and head home, but my feet led me across the street, up the stairs, and I was knocking on Nick's door like I was in a trance. There was a thump and crash, a scattering of noise, and then the sound of a bolt being moved, and the door opened a few inches, catching against a chain lock.
Yeah?
The person who answered the door was a young beta woman, clearly also a family member with her red hair and freckles. I was looking for Nick.
Who? Hold on. I can't see.
A light suddenly flooded the tiny little landing, and I blinked against the sudden brightness. When I was able to focus on the woman, her mouth was hanging open, her eyes wide with shock.
Oh, shit.
She said, and slammed the door in my face. More scatterings of noise and then silence. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, feeling like a dumbass, but still, I had to try. Nothing. I turned down the stairs with a sigh, feeling the beast clawing at the edges of my control, my disappointment giving him fuel. I slipped, clutching the metal railing for support, and when I pulled my hand away, I realized I had left claw marks in it.
Dallas?
That voice struck a chord of recognition deep within my soul, thrumming in a vibration that froze my beast, captivating him. I turned to look up the stairs, and there was Nick. He was wearing an oversized sweatshirt and yoga pants. I needed to scent him. He was downwind of me and up, and the cold trapped scents. The beast was clawing to get near Nick now, but I held my emotional leash tight as I prowled back up the steps. I paused at the first hint of his lemon scent, and the beast deep in me moaned in bliss. That is what I had been missing. I scented the beta on him, and another sweet scent, a familiar scent. I tried to place where I had run across it before. My eyes widened in shock. I'd smelled it on Jessie all last fall, winter, and spring. The beast roared in jealousy. Nick was pregnant.
Chapter 8. Nick. I had been watching Netflix in my room while Kit baked his chocolate cookies when the knock came on the door. I froze, and Kit dropped something in the kitchen, swearing and fumbling about. Just a minute, she yelled. I'll get it. Stick to the plan. I was surprised it had taken a whole week for someone from her family to come around. My parents had come over that afternoon, probably leaving the family event early, which was shocking enough. They listened silently, and then my mother had quietly and calmly asked when I was intending on getting mated. Then, the wailing and gnashing of teeth came when I told her I had no intention of doing that. Kit had kicked them out and held me while I cried, and we'd been left in relative peace since then. I was still getting daily texts about how I was ruining my future and the future of my child by not getting mated before the baby was born. But as long as they kept it to texts, I could manage. I was waiting in frozen anticipation, the show still playing, though it held none of my attention. Who would it be? Her father? Her mother? Her sister Ingrid? I was prepared, but completely confused when Kit came in my room muttering, oh shit, 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 shit. He's here. It's your dad? No, it's the dad, the hot one, the boom boom guy, the him and you. She was speaking in rushed whispers. Kit, what the hell are you talking about? She pressed her hand urgently to my stomach. The dude who stuck this baby in you is right outside our door. My eyes widened in dawning realization. Oh, shit. Shit, shit, shit. She nodded emphatically. That's what I said. I scrambled out of bed and ran 2 steps to my door. No, I need to make sure. I ran to the bathroom to check how I looked. I'm a mess, I moaned. I need to change. Kit grabbed me by the shoulders and ushered me out of the bathroom. There's no time for that. I slammed the door in his face. What? Why would you do that? I panicked, okay? I didn't know what to do. I saw his face and shut up. Just shut up. I shook loose of her grip. I've got this. Go get him, Foxy. Why was Dallas here? Had he somehow heard about the pregnancy? That was ridiculous. How would he? Kit and I were the only ones who knew what he looked like, and we only had a name that we'd already researched and found nothing. I took a deep breath. I could do this. This was good, right? He deserved to know. I opened the door. Empty. Panicked, I ran onto the landing, and there he was, paused halfway down the stairs. Dallas. He whipped around and looked up at me. Damn, he was just as good looking as I remembered. His eyes burned with that fierce, suppressed fire as he took his first step up the stairs, and then another, and another. Any minute now, I waited for him to scent me, to realize. Any minute. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but I'd never been able to imagine his reaction. Would he be pleased? Angry? His eyes finally widened in surprise. Yes, that was it. What would his face reveal now? I'd be able to see it in his eyes. His eyes were so expressive, until they were nothing. It was as if a shadow swept across Dallas's face. The man I'd fantasized about for 3 months had dimmed, a wall descending between us. Any hope I'd had, whether just that he'd accept this child, or that he'd carry me off into the sunset and we'd live happily ever after, died.
It seems we need to talk,
He said, his voice as flat as his eyes. I straightened my shoulders. I wouldn't be cowed by my parents. I certainly wouldn't be cowed by this man who I'd only spent one night with, regardless of the consequences of that night. That would be good. I turned into the safety of my home just in time to see Kit's expectations fade at the side of my face. I took a seat on the couch, and she hurried to join me as Dallas entered. He shut the door softly behind him and stood across from us, arms crossed. Dallas's eyes darted between Kit and me.
Perhaps it would be better for us to speak in private.
Kit placed a protective hand on my arm. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my cousin. Dallas nodded as if I'd answered a question he hadn't actually asked, his shoulders relaxing slightly.
Are you mated?
I blinked in surprise. No. Why would he ask me that? Did he really think I was the kind of guy to go from single to mated in less than 3 months since I'd last seen him? When his shoulders relaxed, a piece clicked into place. The baby is yours, I blurted. I shocked the shadow away. The fire in his eyes flickered, and I felt an unholy joy at its return. His steps were slow and measured as he approached me.
Come again?
The child is yours. He came to a stop only a couple feet away, and I had to crane my neck up at him. Kit's hand trembled on my arm.
You're certain?
I blushed. I'd never gone without a condom before, for any reason. The flames nearly consumed his eyes, and my body flushed with an entirely different emotion than the apprehension I'd been feeling until now. He knelt on one knee in front of me and placed one hand behind my neck, and I vaguely felt Kit's touch disappear, heard her gasp in fear.
I'm going to kiss you now, little Omega.
He didn't give me a chance to respond before claiming my mouth in a blistering kiss that made everything else fade away into nothingness.
Chapter 9. Dallas. Mine, my beast growled as I took Nick's mouth for my own, unable and unwilling to hold him completely back. Mine. Protect. Yes, Nick was mine, as was the child within him. When I had scented the pregnancy, I'd feared the worst, that I'd lost my chance. But the knowledge that Nick actually bore my child had shifted something in me with an audible snap. For once, I felt a complete agreement with the beast. I finally broke the kiss and let Nick fall back on the couch. His cousin had crawled to the corner, her fingers poised over her phone in uncertainty. But I saw all that in my peripheral vision. My attention was completely on Nick. His eyes were glazed over, his lips kiss-swollen. I knew that right now I could command him to do nearly anything, and he would obey without a second thought. A shiver of appreciation rippled through the beast and me. soothing us both. Why didn't you call? Nick blinked a few times, a blush rising in his cheeks. I didn't hurry him. I let him gather himself.
I threw it away,
He admitted. The beast roared in anger and frustration, but I pushed those emotions away. Why?
The guy you were looking for never came back. I was obsessed with thinking about you. I stared at your card for hours every day, thinking about calling you.
You should have. Nick leaned forward and hunched in on himself.
When I found out I was pregnant, it was too late. Your number was gone.
More tension unwound in my neck. Nick hadn't been purposefully keeping me from the knowledge of the child's existence, purposefully keeping me from the opportunity to care for them. You're not working at the bar anymore, I stated. I was grateful. If he were still working there in his condition, that would have prompted a discussion. Nick shook his head.
I was too sick. And then Kit got in a big fight with her dad, and I gave her a place to stay, which wouldn't have sat well with him. So it all worked out in the end. We're planning on moving somewhere bigger, somewhere with a room for each of us, Kit, me, and the baby.
His hand fell protectively to his stomach. The sweatshirt concealed any shape. I wanted to lift it to see the swell of our child, but not now. That would be crossing a line. Nick was uncertain, anxious. I caressed the side of his head, and he leaned into my touch. Where are you moving to? I asked gently. It didn't really matter because I highly doubted my beast would approve, and in this one thing I was content to give in to him.
We haven't decided yet, Nick said with a look at his cousin. Neither of us have jobs right now, so we need to get that taken care of. But my lease is up at the end of next month. We were planning on looking at some places this month.
Come with me. It wasn't a request, though I had planned on framing it in a way that made it seem like it was. The beta seemed to have retrieved some of her spunk, and she crept closer to us.
We don't even know who you are.
I kept my eyes on Nick's. My name is Dallas Corder, Alpha, Brown Bear Shifter. I'm a member of a small pack just outside of Columbia, Tennessee. I'm a bounty hunter. At the very least, you will be able to use my home as a way to get back on your feet. We're not close to much in the way of towns. Columbia is about 30 miles away. But we can help find you a job there or with the pack.
Like what?
Kit asked, and I finally looked at her.
How do we know you're not going to use us as sex slaves or something?
I grinned, letting my teeth show, knowing exactly how terrifying it was. I'd used it to great effectiveness while working. I could sense the acrid fear rising from Kit, but she still lifted her chin in defiance. I promise you, we are a normal pack. My alpha, Asher, is a wolf. He has a cougar mate and a young pup named Aspen. The other alphas are Ryan, Kurt, and Simon.
How is it your alpha is a wolf?
Nick asked.
And I didn't think that bears normally lived in packs.
That is a longer story. The short version is we are all outcasts, but we found a home with each other. I knew words were cheap. I pulled out my phone and navigated to my photos, which were full of the shenanigans of decorating last week. This is my pack. I handed the phone to Nick, and Kit moved back to his side to view it with him.
They're beautiful,
Nick whispered, and the beast growled in pleasure. He might put up a token protest, but his interest was piqued. I'd love to introduce you to them, both of you. Kit still seemed hesitant. Come stay with us for a week. If you're not comfortable, I'll bring you back the very next day. The cousins exchanged a silent, private conversation before Nick turned back to me with a hesitant smile.
We'd like that.
I stood. Excellent. It will take us an hour and a half to return, but you'll be able to sleep in the car.
We can't go tonight,
Kit squawked.
We have to pack.
Nick leaned forward and placed his hand on my arm, chasing away my frown.
She's right. I'd rather wait until morning when I have time and energy to pack.
As if to prove his point, his mouth opened in a wide yawn. Their argument made sense. I will stay here tonight, then. You already have pillows and blankets on the couch. That will be sufficient.
Oh, no, big boy,
Kit protested.
The couch is mine. You can stick your big butt in Nick's bed.
Nick looked up shyly at me from under his lashes. I don't think that would be entirely appropriate, I began, but Kit cut me off.
It's not like you're going to do anything worse to him than you have already.
Another blush bloomed on Nick's face, brighter than before. I can sleep on the floor. It would be infinitely more comfortable if I trusted these floors could hold a full-size brown bear. But even as a human, I could sleep on a hard surface for one night without major negative side effects.
No, Nick protested. That's ridiculous. You'll sleep with me.
I sensed another silent discussion between the cousins. Thank you. In the meantime, do you mind if I use your bathroom to shower?
By all means.
Nick waved me through his room. I remembered where the bathroom was, thanks to my previous visit. Not that it would have taken me any time to find it once more. Part of my reasoning for the shower was to give the cousins actual privacy so they could talk instead of pretending to not be talking while I loomed oddly about. The other part was, I stank like a baboon, and if I was going to be sharing a bed with Nick all night, risky business or not, I wanted to at least smell clean.
Chapter 10. Nick. We can't just go running off to some strange guy's house in the middle of nowhere. Kit was giving me the evil eyes. We mind spoke frantically. She was right. She was absolutely right. But there was something about Dallas that compelled me to submit to him. If he said run, I'd ask how far. If he said jump, how high. If he said come, well, that one depended completely on context, didn't it? Stop thinking sexy thoughts, Kit hissed. I can see you doing it. I don't even want to mind speak in case you pollute my mind with whatever's going on in there. What if he's a serial killer? I rolled my eyes. He's not a serial killer. You don't know that. I took Kit's hands in mine. Kit, he's this baby's father. I can't refuse him the chance to be a father. And part of that is actually getting to know the guy. And did you see the pictures of his pack? They're so happy. Do you really think he's a serial killer with a pack like that? It could be staged, she grumbled, but I knew I was winning her over. You can stay here. I'll only go for the first week, and then we'll figure out what to do from there. Kit slapped me on the side of the head. If you're thinking I'm letting you go alone into that man's sex dungeon, you better think again. At my smirk, she grimaced. Ew, get your mind out of the gutter. If he actually has a sex dungeon and you go willingly, that's your business. I doubted Dallas had a sex dungeon. I didn't even know what a sex dungeon would look like, but I'd be interested in finding out. Kit pushed me off the couch. I don't know what you're thinking, and I don't want to know, but whatever it is, I know it's disgusting. Go, get off my bed, and shut the door. I don't want to hear anything tonight. Just in case, I'm sleeping with headphones on, with Apocalyptica. If a robber breaks in, it's the bear's job to hear and deal with him. Capiche? I felt a little awkward closing my door behind me. The only bathroom in the house was through my room, so I'd been leaving the door cracked in case Kit needed to use it in the middle of the night. I guess she was just determined to hold it in tonight. I was already in my pajamas, as unsexy as they were. I hadn't seen the need to go maternity clothes shopping yet. I'd only just started to notice a belly bump, which meant my work clothes didn't fit at all. But I didn't need them. I suppose I'd have to go shopping soon. Without a job, I was hesitant to spend any of my savings on non-necessities, though. I climbed in bed, not quite certain what I was supposed to do while waiting for Dallas to finish up with his shower. I knew exactly what my body wanted to do. All that talk of sex dungeons and the image of Dallas standing naked in my shower, the water coursing down his body, running in the dips between his muscles. Fuck. As if my dick wasn't hard enough. Did I have enough time to rub one out? No, I didn't dare chance it. What if he finished up in the next few minutes, leaving me with an even harder dick and a case of blue balls? I grabbed my phone and started looking up medical mysteries. Those were always a good boner killer. By the time Dallas was done with his shower, my balls had shriveled safely up and lodged in my throat. Elephantiasis of the testicles was my new go-to for top boner killer. I'd pushed my phone back on my nightstand with horror and curled up in a ball under my covers. The bathroom door creaked open, and its light illuminated Dallas's perfect form for a moment before he hit the switch. I'd left the lamp on his side of the bed on, so I had a very clear view of his towel-clad body. His bare chest was just as wide and perfect as I remembered.
Do you have any spare pajamas?
I sat up and squinted my eyes skeptically. That would fit you? He rubbed the back of his neck.
I'll take that as a no. Would it bother you if I slept in my boxers?
Elephantiasis, elephantiasis. Nope. My mouth was suddenly dry. Dallas slipped back into the bathroom and returned in a moment, this time sans towel, wearing a pair of plaid boxers. He slipped under the covers next to me and turned out the light. I was frozen in the dark silence. Was I breathing too loudly? Too fast? I wasn't taking up too much of the bed, was I? I spread my fingers out to surreptitiously check my space. I was right on the edge of the bed. Did he think I was trying to get away from him? Would it be weird if I shifted further onto the bed? Would he think I was coming on to him?
Nick.
Dallas's voice was low and rumbly and broke my spiraling anxiety.
This might be a weird question, but can I touch your stomach?
I thrilled at the idea of his skin on mine again, but also melted at his sweetness. Of course. I scooted a couple inches closer to him and lifted up the bottom of my sweatshirt. I haven't felt any movement yet. It'll probably be a month or so before I do, and another month after that before you or anyone else can feel. Dallas's hand almost covered my entire stomach. He rubbed his hand slowly over the small swell.
This is crazy,
he said. I laughed softly. Tell me about it. His hand stilled.
I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. I know better. I
wrapped my hand over his. Shh. It is what it is. All we can do is move forward. I'm sorry I threw your number away.
We both seem to have pretty sucky timing, huh?
I shrugged. Grateful he couldn't see the parade of confused emotions dancing across my face in the dark. I tend to think everything happens when it's supposed to happen. I freaked out, yeah, especially the first month. But now I'm okay with it, for the most part. I can't promise the freakouts are completely over.
Thank you for agreeing to come with me. You didn't have to.
I know, but I want to. We fell silent, his hand on my belly, my hand on his, and fell asleep soon after.
Chapter 11. Dallas. I woke feeling refreshed and content, as if I could lie in bed all morning and be completely happy. That was unusual. My beast rode me hard, and he was rarely satisfied with stillness, though I could sometimes lull him into stagnation with boredom. The first of my senses to come online was my scent, and I smelled lemon. Beyond that, some kind of vanilla candle. It was a strangely pleasing combo. Then my sense of touch keyed me into the fact that I was in a bed softer than my own, smoother and smaller. Beyond that, there was a small warm body wrapped in my arms. I blinked my eyes open to see Nick had nestled against my chest at some point in the night. No wonder my beast was so content. That deep, instinctive part of me had latched onto Nick as if he were the savior of the world. I tried to recall a time where I'd felt this comfortable with anyone, especially one of my bedmates, and I drew a blank. Other people had felt like annoyances, chains attempting to hold me down. But Nick was like a tether, as if my beast's world had completely reoriented when I'd met him and his center of gravity had focused on... Fucking hell. That was exactly what had happened. I'd imprinted on Nick. When had that happened? When I first saw him? When he invited me to stay after closing? When we'd had sex? Suddenly, life was split into two different eras, before Nick and after Nick. I realized that until that moment, I'd never truly experienced fear. Now I could not shake the deep, visceral fear of life without him. When I'd made the offer for him to come home with me, I thought it was simply protectiveness over both him and the child. But it was more than that. Protecting them was the same as protecting myself. In the moment, I recognized that I had imprinted on Nick. He had become my everything. I needed to talk to Asher. I would have to wait, but I needed to move, to do something. I pulled on my pants and padded into the kitchen, planning on making coffee, but Nick's organizational skills were beyond me. I would have thought with such a minimalist style it would have been fairly easy to find coffee filters, but I was wrong. I remembered passing a gas station less than a block away. It would be shit coffee, but it would give me something to do. I quietly pulled on the rest of my clothes and ventured out into the cold, foregoing my car. The walk would do me good, give me time to think, to come to terms with my shifted sense of reality. It was unlikely Nick reciprocated my connection to him. I was going to have to do my damnedest to show him the best of our pack life. He was a city boy, but he was also a shifter. Would I be able to tap into that wild nature? Open his eyes to the beauty and simplicity of our life out in the country? I only had a week. Why had I offered a week as a test run? I should have defaulted to a month, especially with how dreary everything looked in the winter. There were a lot of rough spots to look past. But in the other 3 seasons, it was beautiful, peaceful. The coffee was surprisingly not bad, and I felt more confident as I walked back to the house. I had a vague, scratchy plan, and once I talked to Asher and Jesse, I'd have a better plan. Jesse knew what it was like to be a pregnant Omega. He'd know how I could appeal to and provide for Nick's needs. I expected everyone to still be asleep when I returned to the apartment, but I could hear yelling as I climbed the steps. I ran up the last half, yanking the door half off its hinges as I jumped in, ready to defend my Omega. But he was sitting safely on the couch, tears streaming down his face while his cousin paced, her fingers buried in her hair. They froze at my entrance and turned in comic unison to face me. In a bid for time to calm my racing heart, I turned around and closed the door slowly. When it latched, I turned back to face them. What happened? Nick hiccuped and looked away. Kit shot him a look, and I would have given anything to hear what she was saying to him. It was clear she had been the one yelling. Well, they probably both had, if I were to guess from the tension in the room. But she was continuing to yell at him silently, and that I would not have. Enough! I didn't yell, but they both jerked their heads to focus on me. Nick brushed his tears away, and Kit ducked her head sheepishly. Are you having second thoughts about visiting my home? Nick's mouth dropped open.
Oh no, that's not it at all.
When he didn't continue, I prompted. Do you want to tell me about it? Nick closed his eyes.
No.
Kit looked away from my gaze. Well then, since we're all up and awake, how can I help? We might as well get on the road. I wasn't done with this conversation, not by a long shot, but I couldn't force Nick to open up to me. Once he accepted me, if he accepted me, I admonished myself, this type of conversation would go very differently.
Chapter 12. Nick. I set Dallas to the job of making breakfast. Packing would go much faster and easier if I wasn't turning around every 30 seconds to catch his eyes on me. And I knew he was bothered by the scene I had made while he was gone, even if he didn't know what had upset me. There was no way I was going to tell him that when I discovered he wasn't in my bed when I woke, that I'd assumed the worst, that he had decided all these shenanigans with me and the baby just wasn't worth it, and he'd decided to hightail it. And logically, I wouldn't have blamed him. He hadn't asked for this, but my reaction was hormone-fueled and completely out of proportion. I'd been completely unreasonable, and I knew it. I had pushed Kit to the edge of her patience and then shoved her off the cliff. I'm sorry, I said to her while I was packing. I was being a little ridiculous. A little? I could hear the quirk of her smile in her tone. I knew you had it bad, Nick, but damn. She was right. I was completely head over heels for this man I'd had one night with, albeit an extremely hot night. 2 nights if you included last night, and that had been heart-meltingly sweet. Each new facet intrigued and confused me even more. Was he the shy, bumbling hottie from the bar? Was he the commanding sex god of the first night? Was he the sweet father from last night? What was a facade and what was real? My fox loved the mystery. No other man had turned my head around with so many questions. I blame the pregnancy hormones, I responded. I was out of control. Are we okay? Kit's response was slow in coming. We're okay, Nick. But don't get too attached to this guy too soon, okay? He's not a puppy you can take home just because he's cute. I held back the comment that that was kind of what I had done. I knew what she meant, but I didn't agree. As crazy as it seemed, Dallas seemed exactly like the kind of guy I could take home and keep. Or maybe I was the puppy, since he was taking me home? Whatever. It was a terrible analogy.
Omelets are done.
Dallas called. I zipped up my suitcase. It was just a week. I didn't need much. I rolled the small suitcase out of the room behind me. Thanks, Dallas. He set the plates with eggs on the table.
I'm no cook, not like my friend Ryan, but I can handle the basics. Can I get you something to drink?
I noticed the styrofoam cup next to his plate. That's why he had left the apartment. You didn't have to go out for coffee.
I looked, but I couldn't find any filters.
Ah, I hadn't been drinking coffee since I found out I was pregnant, so I wouldn't have noticed if I'd run out. I'm sorry about that.
It's not a problem. The walk was nice. Drink?
Just water for me, thank you. I'll grab mine, Kit said. You said it's about a 2-hour drive? I asked as I dug into the omelet. Dallas nodded.
Give or take. If we had to drive through evening rush hour, we'd be talking 3 hours just to get south of Spring Hill. But in the morning, it should be a straight shot.
Are you originally from that area? I didn't want to sound like I was grilling the guy, but Kit wasn't helping with conversation flow, and I genuinely was interested.
No, I'm originally from Cosby, Tennessee. I traveled around for a few years, hooked up with Asher on his bounty hunting gig, and I've been working for him ever since. When he found his mate and his pack kicked him out, it just felt natural to follow him.
My fork clattered to my plate. You're a bounty hunter?
Well, bail retrieval agent, technically. Ash doesn't like us using the term bounty hunter. But when you say bail retrieval agent, no one knows what the fuck you're talking about. Everyone knows what a bounty hunter is.
So that guy you were asking about that first time? He didn't know you were dead, did he? Dallas's eyes fell, and he hummed, flustered.
I'm sorry I lied about that. It's just standard operating procedure. You never know who's going to squeal on you, who's going to balk at talking to a bounty hunter.
I didn't like that Dallas had lied to me, but I could understand it. Can you promise you haven't lied to me about anything else? He met me square in the eyes.
That I can promise. And I can promise I will never lie to you again.
Hot damn. That sent shivers up and down my spine. Dallas was so. He's intense, Kit said without looking up from her plate. Exactly. That was the perfect word. Intense. Breakfast wrapped up quickly after that, and once everything was washed and set to dry, we locked up the apartment and hit the road. I took shotgun while Kit stuffed the back seat full of blankets and pillows and went straight back to sleep, grumbling in mind-speak about someone getting her up too early. I'd intended to use the opportunity to talk to Dallas more, but I was asleep before we got on the interstate. Chapter 13. Dallas.
The closer we got to home, the more my beasts settled, but the more my human concerns grew. I called Asher when I stopped for gas, just to check if it was okay if I brought Nick and Kit back. He gave his approval without question, but I still felt as if I'd failed him a little by not taking that into account. I wasn't used to operating in a pack. That wasn't an excuse, just reality, and something I would need to work on, especially if I was going to be raising a cub. I hoped I would be raising a cub. I wouldn't force Nick to stay, but I desperately wanted him to. I wanted to wake up each morning with him by my side, build a house for him and our children, and breed him full of cubs. It was primal and old-fashioned, and I couldn't help it. I'd been so worried about whether Nick would want to stay or not, I hadn't considered how the rest of the pack would react to me bringing two strangers into our community. I assumed they would take Ryan's old room in the double wide, but it was a bit of a bachelor pad. If this was going to be long-term, I'd have to talk to the others about prioritizing my own home. I hadn't been interested in one before now, but suddenly it was imperative. Was this what Asher had felt like that first day we'd come to the property? Rootless, newly committed as a pack, homeless? This burning uncertainty and need to do the right thing, whatever it was, if only you could figure it out. As soon as I was close enough to mind speak, Asher, I did. We're about 10 minutes away. Good, Asher responded immediately. How are they doing? I looked down at my Omega. His arms were wrapped protectively over his abdomen, and his neck twisted a little awkwardly, even though he'd leaned the chair back. They've slept the entire way. You might want to wake them up and give them time to prepare. Asher's voice was accompanied with a chuckle. Oh no. Tell Jesse we don't need a big thing. I want Nick to see what our normal life is. Let him really get to know us. I don't want to overwhelm us. If you want him to get to know the real pack, this is part of it. It's the daily schedule, yes, but it's the celebrations and the welcomings. Asher's tone was stern, and I bared my neck slightly in response, even though he wasn't there. Besides, you try telling my little mate he can't throw a party and see how well you fare. I kind of brought that one on myself, didn't I? I had introduced Jesse to Pinterest. I had awoken that monster. You may have given him the means, but I'm pretty sure he was always meant to be an event planner. It makes him happy, and I have a feeling it will make your guests happy. Don't stress too much about it. Asher advising me not to stress was like the pot calling the kettle black. But he had been loosening over the last year and a half since Jesse had come into his life. I was serious about waking them up so they have time to prepare, though. See you in a few. Instead of waking Nick and Kit up while I was on the road, I stopped at the last gas station in the area. I shook Nick gently by the shoulder and turned around on my seat to make sure Kit could hear me. We're almost to my pack's lands. Apparently, they're planning some big welcoming thing. So I thought you might want the chance to freshen up before we arrive. Because they're probably going to jump on you the minute you get out of the car. Nick was immediately out of the car. I need to pee. He disappeared into the gas station and Kit lurched up, her hair even wilder than when she'd been pulling it out by the roots this morning. Sleep well? Like a baby, she mumbled. I'm going to get some caffeine. That wasn't a half bad idea. I followed her into the gas station, picking up a couple bottles of Cokes and some chocolate. I'd had experience with the coffee here, and I wasn't interested in a second round. Kit didn't have the benefit of my experience, though, and she'd had her cup so loaded up with flavored creamer by the time I noticed that I doubted whether it mattered if the brew was strong enough to stand a horseshoe in. She wouldn't taste it. Nick picked through the drinks and chose a root beer. Life without caffeine is hard, he complained. Why'd you give it up then? Kit placed her items on the counter, and I shoved mine up with hers and then stole Nick's to add it to the pile, putting it on my card. You're not supposed to drink a lot of caffeine when you're pregnant. I technically could have a cup in the morning, but I feel like if I had one cup, that would suddenly turn into two, and then next thing I knew, I'd be drinking a pot a day and the kid would be born with more coffee in his veins than blood. I handed the others their items and we headed back to the car. Fair enough then. There was apparently a lot I didn't know about pregnancy. I needed to sit down and talk with Asher and Jesse sooner rather than later. Chapter 14. Nick. Dallas had been completely rad about his pack waiting for us. As soon as his car pulled close to the three houses, the door to one burst open and people erupted from it. It wasn't as overwhelming as I had been anticipating. I remembered Dallas saying his pack was small, but I had no gauge for what that actually looked like. Was 100 people small or large? In this case, Dallas could have said tiny, and my guess would have still been over the mark. My family was 10 times larger than their pack, if not larger. There were 6 adults, and one of them was holding a child. I vaguely recognized some of them from Dallas's pictures, but I had no idea who was who. The dark, scary-looking guy in the back with a scar running over half his face must be his alpha. I'd grown up in a den of foxes. We were wild, irreverent, loud, and mischievous. I couldn't imagine that guy cracking a smile at one of Uncle Jerry's old fart jokes. The smallest man reached me first, wrapping me and then Kit in a hug. A faint peachy scent lingered after him.
Definitely an Omega. The only Omega, I suspected, feeling slightly intimidated by the size of the other men. I'm Jesse, the Omega said. Welcome to our home. Before Kid or I could respond, he gestured to the man holding the child. This is my mate Asher and the alpha of the pack, and our princess, Aspen. This was the pack alpha? Other than Jesse, he was the smallest of the alphas. I glanced between him and the man with the scar. How could such a pale, slight man command the control of such a terrifying specimen of humanity? I hadn't realized I was tense until Dallas walked up behind me and placed a hand on the small of my back. I relaxed into his touch. It didn't matter exactly who the alpha was, as long as Dallas was here to guide me. Jesse finished the introductions. Simon was just slightly taller than the alpha and clearly related. Ryan was broad-chested and dark-skinned with kind eyes. Kurt was pale and dark-haired. I would have shuffled him into the nerd category if he weren't clearly well-muscled. The scarred guy was Casper. As everyone turned back to the house to get warm, I was surprised to see that his hair touched his waist.
You okay?
Dallas asked, mind-speaking me for the first time. A small smile crinkled my eyes at my secret pleasure. You made me think your pack was going to be overwhelming. You've clearly never been to a Monroe family breakfast, and those are the tamest of our gatherings. Dallas kept the door open for Kit and me.
I'd like to experience that sometime.
I pressed my hands to my cheeks as if to warm my hands, but in reality, I was attempting to cool my blush. Did he really mean that? He must. Dallas didn't seem like the kind of guy who said things just to be polite. Jesse clapped his hands to call for attention. He'd climbed onto a chair, and his mate stood by with an exasperated but indulgent smile. Okay, everyone. Dallas didn't want us to make a big deal out of this, but I'm going to anyway. First, I want to say welcome to the pack to Nick and Kit and baby Dallas. Dallas hasn't exactly told us a lot about you, but if he cares enough about you to bring you home, that's pretty fucking special.
Jesse?
Dallas growled, and the rest of the pack laughed, though Asher muttered something about language, with a significant look at Aspen. I know, but hold on. Nick? Kit? I don't know what kind of background you came from, but I came from a pretty shitty one. I'd never really known what a family could be like until I met Asher and these guys. They may seem a little rough on the outside, but they're gold through and through. Okay, I'm done. Food and plates are in the kitchen. Help yourself. Find a seat wherever. Jesse led the way to the food himself, and the three of us had a moment of quiet by the front door.
I'm so sorry,
Dallas said.
This is why I told them not to make a big deal about this. But, like Jesse said, he's never really had a family, and he's determined to do everything right for Aspen, and as an example to her.
Was he kidding? I was barely holding back the tears. The level of acceptance I'd felt here in the last 5 minutes with strangers was more than I'd received from my entire family, excluding Kid, in the last week. I cleared my throat. It's fine. Shall we get some food? The line of alphas pushed Kit and me forward, separating us from Dallas, but I suddenly wasn't scared anymore, not even by the intimidating Casper. Ryan, who had apparently cooked most of the food, was in line behind us, and he pushed a little bit of everything on our plates, which meant we'd had to balance carefully as we moved from the kitchen to the living room. Jesse patted the empty spot next to him, and I took it happily. Jesse smirked at my plate. You're going to have to learn to stand up to these alphas, especially while you're pregnant. They'll mother hen you to death. That was what my family had been like. Should have been like. They would have accepted me and the baby and taken care of us if I'd been mated, or been willing to find a quickie mate. Why couldn't they see how ridiculous that was? Regardless of how the baby was conceived, I was going to love him or her. That was what mattered.
Why is he crying?
Someone asked, concern and fear in their tone. I blinked up to see who it was. Kyle? Kevin? No, Kurt. It's fine. Jesse waved away his concern. Nothing a little chocolate won't fix. Kurt, can you go get a piece of the cake? Oh, I should have known better than to ask you. Dallas, he shouted, can you get a slice of cake for your Omega? Dallas's Omega. I was surprised at how much I liked that. I'd always stood on my own, and proudly. But right now, I really didn't mind the thought of belonging to someone, especially if that someone was Dallas. Jessie had been right. Chocolate fixed me up pretty quickly, and Kit and I faded into the background of the bright camaraderie of the pack. When the meal was finished, as I was enjoying my second helping of cake, Jessie went back into organizational mode. I'm sure you two want to get settled in a bit. Dinner tonight will probably be leftovers, so nothing fancy. But I know Dallas will have a fit if at least part of the day isn't low key. Jessie smiled at Dallas with fraternal love. Kit, we've got you set up in Ryan's old room, and Dallas can show you around the house. I had Ryan check on the state of the fridge since who knows what these guys eat now that he's moved out. Aspen had been bouncing happily on her father's knee until then, but at Jessie's voice, she suddenly realized her other favorite person had been missing for a while, and she started yelling. Jessie set his plate down. I guess it's the little girl's time to eat. Just let us know if you need anything, okay?
What about Nick?
Dallas asked.
Did you set up Ryan's room for both of them?
Jessie took Aspen and turned around in confusion. I had thought, was I wrong? I thought he was going to stay with you. That's fine. I jumped in, trying to avoid making an already awkward situation more awkward. Do you mind if I stay with you? I asked Dallas quickly before I made any assumptions.
Of course, I just thought you'd rather.
I wouldn't. Dallas's room is fine, I said aloud. Can we help with any dishes or anything before we head over? Asher stood to collect our plates.
Not today. Normally I'd accept because you're family now. But today we'll let you skip out. Just the once.
His easy acceptance was astounding. Our family was a lot more insular. It had taken my cousin Renee 2 years to get her mother to stop calling her mate that hooting boy. To be fair, he couldn't help but hold the ooh sounds when he spoke. But he was an owl. What did she expect? The rest of the pack stayed behind to clean, I supposed, while Dallas showed us over to the double wide, pointing out Ryan's house and the tiny house Jessie and Asher had lived in before Aspen was born. I saw the gleam in Kit's eyes as we passed it. Maybe it wouldn't be as difficult to convince her to let me stay beyond the first week we had agreed on. Maybe she'd be interested in staying herself, because I already knew I'd be staying for as long as I could. Maybe the hormones were leading me to snap judgments as well as irrational fits of crying, and I'd change my mind in a week. If I did, fair enough. But being here fulfilled something bone deep, something I hadn't known I was missing.
Chapter 15. Dallas. I was so frustrated with Jesse's assumptions, but it wasn't like I'd been terribly great at communicating my intentions with bringing Nick and Kit here, had I? My alpha was busy finishing up cleaning, and Jesse was putting Aspen to bed. But as soon as I could, without awkwardly leaving Nick and Kit, I would have to have a talk with them. At the very least, I should have warned them that this was only for a week. What happened after that was up to Nick and Kit. Welcome to the bachelor pad. I opened the door and bent in a courtly bow. It's pretty simple. You're welcome to anything and everything you find. The kitchen and living room were split by the kitchen island/breakfast bar. We have pack meetings in the morning, but other than that, there's nothing big you need to know. The bathroom is here. I opened the door and flicked on the light. And Kit, your room is here, the first one past it. The bed was covered with a comforter I'd never seen before, and I wondered how Jesse had had time to conjure it up. Or had he bought it a while ago and simply been waiting for the opportunity?
Thanks. I'm probably going to take a shower and another nap if that's okay.
How she could sleep again after sleeping all the way here astounded me. But whatever worked for her. Of course, my room is just across the hall if you need anything. Kit tossed her stuff on the bed and began rifling through her bag as I turned to open my door. I turned the light on and waited for Nick's judgment with bated breath.
This is nice,
he said, bending down to pick up his suitcase, but I beat him to it. I lifted it and set it on the bed. Nick, I just want you to know that if you're uncomfortable staying in my room, we can figure out other arrangements. I can sleep on the couch or in the tiny house. I didn't want him to feel like he had to stay with me just for appearances.
I think if the tiny house is an option, you might have to fight Kit,
he said with a laugh. When I didn't smile, he wrapped his arms across his chest.
You said it was okay if I stayed with you. Do you not want me to stay in your room? Honestly, I had kind of figured this would be the arrangement when you first invited us. If I misread anything, please tell me.
I sat on the bed and buried my face in my hands, at war with the beast within me. He wanted to push Nick down on the bed and tell him to stay now, stay forever. My human side was terrified of scaring him off. Nick stepped in front of me and pulled my face up. His eyes flickered between mine, and then that mischievous smile that had first caught my attention blossomed on his face.
Your eyes are burning. Tell me you want me.
I do. My words rumbled deep in my chest, both man and beast in agreement. But I want you to want me as well.
Oh, my alpha. I don't quite fully understand all the ways that I want you, but have no doubt that I do.
I'm already dreading you leaving in a week. Nick's breath hitched and I tugged him closer to me, spreading my knees so that he could stand between them. He rested his arms on my shoulders and toyed with my hair.
What if, what if I don't leave in a week? What if I already know I want to stay?
My beast roared in triumph. Do you? Nick nodded.
I think so.
Shaking his head, he corrected himself.
No, I know so. Regardless of anything else, you are this child's father, and I want you in the baby's life. I want to explore whatever possibilities bring us to that path.
Feeling bolder, I let my hands drift up Nick's legs. What possibilities might those be? Nick blushed and glanced down. My fingers clenched as I recognized the scent of his arousal. We already know we're compatible. Your scent is so strong, I can hardly smell anything else over it. Beyond that, we're very compatible in bed. He looked up at me through those thick lashes and my cock throbbed.
These are both true, and from what little I've seen, I love your pack. They clearly care for each other, and it seems they accept you, and by extension me, without conditions. That's not something I can say for my family.
I growled at the idea of Nick suffering even the slightest bit of hardship from his family.
Calm down, big boy,
Nick whispered, but there was an undercurrent to his voice that wasn't intended to be soothing. It was need. Tell me what you hope we can be, Nick. I wanted it all. I wanted Nick as my mate, our child growing up under our care and protection and the protection of my pack. I wanted him in my bed and my life as I'd never wanted anything so badly before. I felt I was going to go crazy from the simple power of that desire. He soothed my bear so that he was more than just a beast.
I want to give this a try. A real try, not just a week.
I closed my eyes, unable to express the excessive emotion welling up from my soul. How long is that? I rasped. Nick slid his hands back to press against my shoulders.
I don't want to put a date on it. I don't want to think about this ending. Is that okay?
It was more than okay, but my ability to form words had disappeared. I reached up to pull Nick's head toward mine and claimed his lips, hoping they could communicate better this way than with empty air. Nick hummed in pleasure as I explored his mouth, but my bear wasn't content being under Nick, even the slightest bit, for very long. I rose and flipped him onto his back with a growl. He bounced on the mattress, his mouth open in a silent oh of surprise. Oh, shit. Did I hurt the baby?
What?
I crawled onto the mattress next to him. Did I hurt the baby throwing you around like that?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
But it wasn't certain, so no more throwing Nick around until after the baby was born. I wouldn't forget.
I was just surprised at your strength. I mean, I remember it, but remembering and experiencing are two very different things. And I don't think you picked me up and threw me down like that before.
His eyes were lit with heady excitement. He definitely loved being manhandled. That I could do, just gentler. Sit up, I commanded, and Nick's eyes glazed over as he obeyed my command. I stripped him of his shirt and slowly pushed him back down on the bed to do the same to his pants. Then it was my turn. I stepped off the bed to rid myself of my clothes and relished the hunger in Nick's eyes as I stroked my cock. Have you thought of me since that night? Nick gave me a look like I was crazy. All the time. Did you pleasure yourself while thinking of me? I stepped to the edge of the bed, still slowly stroking myself. Only you, Nick whispered. Fuck. I squeezed the base of my cock below the bulge of my knot, holding back the sudden tightness in my balls. Too soon. Way too soon. Show me. Nick's blush spread down his chest, but he did as I said without question, reaching one hand down to palm himself, his eyes still on my hand. I started moving it, slowly. Is that all you do? Nick's cheeks burned brighter. No, I have a toy dildo and knot I play with, but I didn't bring it with me. Were you planning on getting the real thing? Nick's eyes met mine. Hoping? Do you want this? I asked, stroking down my cock, watching his eyes fall to watch, unconsciously biting his lip. Yes. Then come over here and take it. Nick sprang up as if he had been waiting for my command. He knelt before me, his hands fluttering at my side like butterflies before finding their perch. And then he took me into his mouth. Remembering how eager he had been before, I grabbed his hair to make sure he didn't go too far too fast. He went limp in my grip, and I thrust slowly in, not sure how much he could take. We'd been in a different position before, one that had given him a lot more control. But Nick swallowed eagerly around me, and my hips began twitching in instinctive thrusts, fucking his mouth. Nick's mouth was heaven, hot and wet and tight. I was amazed that his pert mouth could take my full width, but it did, and he looked amazing, stretched wide around me, his lips already red and wet. I pulled all the way out, and Nick whimpered, swaying toward me. I want to come this way. Is that okay? Please, Nick moaned, and that was all the answer I needed. I split his lips with my thick cock once more and pressed deep, watching Nick take me physically, as thick and overwhelming as I was, stirred emotions I thought I would never know. Complete acceptance. Nick had talked of how accepting my pack was, and how amazing it was for him. But to me, he was the amazing one. He didn't balk at my commands, at the switch between my public and private personas, and Nick had seen deeper into my private self than anyone ever had. I thrust harder, deeper, and Nick only moaned in desire, his hands clenching at my sides. As the energy wound tight in my gut and I was about to warn him, one hand dropped to my balls and tugged them. His touch was like a trigger. I roared as my cum filled his throat. His muscles clenched around me, sucking down every drop. When I stilled, he gently licked every inch of my cock, leaving no drop of cum behind. He kept his touch light, and it was almost too much, but I didn't want him to stop. When he sat back with a satisfied smirk, I leaned forward to kiss him, tasting my seed on him. I wanted to do the same for him, to swallow his essence, to make it part of myself. Your turn, I murmured. Too late, Nick said, glancing down. His chest and legs were painted with his cum. Bad boy. But I suppose I can still get a taste. I pushed him backward and licked off every drop. It had the slight lemon taste of his scent, and I couldn't get enough of it. I took advantage of his position to nuzzle the slight swell of his stomach, then picked him up to set him in the middle of the bed, then curled myself around him. Thank you, I murmured into his shoulder. For what? For being you. Chapter 16. Nick. We took a short nap and I woke before Dallas. I hadn't gotten the opportunity to study his sleeping form before. Both times he'd woken before me. His muscular arm was locked around me, so I had to slip through his arms since I couldn't break their hold. I lay on my side to study the man who'd stolen my heart. Was I being naively trusting? Me and him. It just seemed so right.
He was 2 or 3 times my size, a difference that made me feel protected, treasured. His eyes were closed, but I could easily remember their soft blue, the fire that burned in the black depths of their center when it was just him and me and nothing between us. He would make a good father, a strong mate. My breath caught. I'd not dared think or hope for it before. Could he be my mate? Would he? My body was tingling with the possibility. I hadn't realized how much I wanted it until this moment. I could see me living here with Dallas, with our child. No, children. I wanted a whole pile of kits and cubs with Dallas. I wanted it so badly it hurt. I took a shuddering breath. I needed to calm down first. A shower would be just the thing. I hadn't taken one this morning, too eager to get on the road. I rifled through my bags and found a clean change of clothes in my toiletries bag and closed Dallas's door softly behind me. I jumped when I turned around to find Kit staring at me, her arms crossed. I told you to keep it down. We just, she held up a hand to stop me. At least I know you're not making babies. Been there, got the maternity clothes, right? I darted a look around. Can we talk for a moment? Aren't you on your way to shower? In a minute. I pushed her back into her room and shut the door behind us, even though it wasn't necessary when mind speaking. Habit, I guess. Any private conversations in the Monroe home had to be actually in private, or someone would start poking at you asking what was going on. How do you know when you found the one? Kit plopped onto her bed. You know I'm the last person you should be talking to about this. You're the only person I have to talk to. I sat next to her. Besides, it's not like you don't know everything about the situation anyway. Kit sighed. I'm not talking about the moral rightness of it, but think about it. When have I ever been in a relationship? I tilted my head and thought. There was that guy in ninth grade. Yeah, I used him for his chemistry notes. The barista whose schedule you memorized? Kit flipped her hair. He was the only one who could get my drink right. Try again. I racked my brain, but all I could come up with were a string of one-night stands. Not that I was judging. That would be hypocritical of me. I don't know. That's kind of my point. I don't do relationships. Never have. I don't expect I ever will. Sex is fun. A lot of fun. But I don't like mixing sex with relationships. That's weird. Kit almost sounded defensive. No, unexpected. I really hadn't noticed. I'm sorry, Kit Kat. Kit shrugged, but her arms loosened. Any time I've tried to talk to someone about it, they just assume I haven't met the right one yet, or that I'm a jerk. Well, I know you're a jerk. I smiled to show her I was kidding. But as far as relationships, if you say that's just how you are, I believe you, Kit. Kit graced me with one of her rare, grateful smiles. Thank you. Now was the perfect time to tell Kit I thought Dallas was the one for me, that he was it. But even though I'd been accepting of her, was she going to be as accepting of me? I couldn't help but feel as if she was going to turn on me like the rest of our family. Kit seemed to sense the turn of my thoughts. Sorry I can't be much help. Deep breath. No time like the present. I think I'm in love with Dallas. I know it's soon, but I think it's like you knowing you don't want sex in a relationship. It's something I just know. It's deep in my bones. I didn't dare look at Kit, but when she spoke, her voice was gentle, without judgment. That sounds like imprinting. Fuck. I hadn't even thought of that with everything that was going on. I was almost sure you were going to say it's hormones. Well, it probably is hormones. She mocked my tone from earlier. But if you say you're in love, you probably are. And you've probably imprinted on him. That made a lot of sense. And it actually made things easier. An imprint was like a half bond. It could only happen with a compatible person. And it would push me to be close to Dallas, to take care of him. If he had imprinted on me as well, we basically got to jump 6 months of normal relationship cycles. which meant that I wasn't crazy for thinking of mating Dallas so soon. Not that he'd asked me. I hoped he would ask me. Go on, take a shower, Kit urged. Your guy will be up and looking for you soon. I watched some TV with Simon today. Guess what? He's an even bigger jerk than me. You two should get along great. Now go. I'm going. Even though Kit hadn't been able to answer my original question directly, she'd led me to the answer I needed anyway, which was probably better in the long run. The shower was restful, though by the time I got out, I hadn't decided what I was going to do with my newfound knowledge about having imprinted on Dallas. After clearing the air with him earlier, though, I didn't feel the pressure to find out right now. Chapter 17. Dallas.
When I woke, I was alone in bed, but I could feel that Nick hadn't gone far. Even not far, felt too far right now, though. I threw on some pants and padded out into the hallway. The TV was playing something in the living room, but Nick was closer than that. I slipped into the bathroom as silently as I could and peeked my head past the shower curtain. Nick smiled.
I sensed you approaching.
He scrubbed his hands through his hair, rinsing away the suds, and I admired the long, slender stretch of his body. Am I too late to join?
Never.
I shucked my pants and pushed Nick out of the water for just a moment to rinse my body, and then I pulled him back into the spray, pressing his back to my front and kneading his neck and shoulders with my hands. He groaned.
That feels amazing.
Just wait until you see what I can do with feet. You'll appreciate that in a few months. I moved down his back, hitting all the tight spots.
I'd appreciate it now.
I leaned forward to kiss the tender skin right behind his ear, and he shivered. Tonight, maybe. We can watch a movie. You can kick back, and I'll work on your feet. Nick moaned again as I hit a particularly tender spot.
If that's the kind of treatment I can expect here, I'm never leaving.
That was kind of the point. Nick turned in my arms, but blinked and flinched as the water spattered up into his face. I stepped through the water and let it fall down my back instead.
What's the plan for the rest of the day?
Nick asked.
I've already been harassed by my cousin for being too loud, so we can check that off the list.
That might not be the end of the harassment, I warned him. We might get past Kurt with just a look, but Simon doesn't know how to let things go. Nick made fists and pumped his arms a little, flexing his muscles.
I'm tough. I can handle it.
I ran my hands up his back and down his sides, feeling the dips and ridges of his muscles. You are strong of will, strong of body, strong of personality. Just don't be so strong you don't let me protect you a little, okay? If I hadn't arrived at his apartment when I had, I knew he would have pushed through, raised our cub on his own. But he didn't have to, and I wanted him to know that. I wanted to stand between him and whatever ugliness the world could throw at him.
Okay, I'll let you protect me from your scary packmates.
Nick turned it around into a joke, but he leaned into my body, accepting the protection I offered. I wrapped my arms around him and let the hot water pour over us. As for the rest of today, I need to talk with Asher for a bit. Do you mind just hanging out here? Nick rolled his neck.
That's fine. Are we eating dinner here or there?
Here probably, but I'll check. We finished showering without too much handsiness. I could tell Nick was willing, but my mind was focused on talking to Asher and Jesse. If I was going to entice Nick to stay here for true long term, I needed to be able to offer him more than a room in a shared house, especially with a cub on the way. Is now a good time to talk? I asked Asher as Nick and I got dressed. Come on over. We're just playing with Aspen. It was good to see Asher enjoying life. Before Jesse had come into his life, I'd often thought that he seemed like a man in stasis, doing what he needed to get through the day, the month, the year, but no real goals or aspirations, no joy. He was a man come alive with Jesse and Aspen in his life. Nick decided to check out what was on TV, and I was grateful it was just Kurt there. I could trust him not to harass Nick much. Of course, He might just sit there and ignore him, but that was Kurt. Half the time, I don't think he even saw what was on the television in front of him. His mind always wrapped up with whatever new gadget he was working on. Aspen's giggles reached me before I opened the door. We all called her our princess because it was too true. She was definitely the princess of the pack. Just come in, Asher said before I knocked on the door. The house smelled like apple pie and cinnamon, the scent practically washing over me as I hurried to shut the door against the cold.
Dallas, do you want mulled cider?
Jessie called from the kitchen. Is it child-friendly or adult-friendly? I asked. Jessie leaned through the breakfast bar.
Child-friendly by default, but we have bourbon.
One adult-friendly mulled cider, then. And one for me, Asher added. Aspen had turned at the sound of my voice and gave me her trademark Aspen grin. I scooped her up for a kiss and she shrieked in laughter at the brush of my beard. I held her with new wonder. I can't believe I'm going to have one of these in a few months. The world is different now, isn't it? Aspen turned and tried to lurch toward her father. He put his hands up and I handed her over. Completely different. We silently watched Aspen play with the buttons on Asher's shirt until Jessie brought the tray of drinks into the room.
2 adult ciders, 1 kid-friendly one, and 1 bottle of milk.
I looked at Jessie questioningly, but kept my mouth shut. Asher caught the glance anyway and reached out to take his mate's hand.
We didn't want to overshadow your good news, and Casper only told us yesterday. We're expecting again.
That's amazing. That meant Nick wouldn't be pregnant alone. Our baby would have playmates their own age. I was getting ahead of myself. I had no idea if Nick would stay to the end of his pregnancy, let alone after.
We're planning on telling everyone at Christmas, if it isn't obvious by scent before then,
Jessie said with a smile of joy. The rest of Asher's statement caught up to me. Wait, Casper told you? We'd all been there when he'd announced they were pregnant with Aspen. What is it with that guy? Does he have a super nose or something? Asher coughed into his cider, which splashed it onto his face and the floor. Jessie handed him a napkin with a concerned look. Or something. He's never told me not to tell you all, but he's never told me to tell you either. I waited patiently for Asher to sort through his thoughts. He hadn't been brought up to lead, though he had certainly been born to it. Judging the correct approach wasn't easy for him, though, outside of our job and logistics. When it came to the relationships between pack members, he approached with heavy consideration. All I feel comfortable saying right now is that Casper has a greater awareness of the world than anyone I've ever met. Now, how are Nick and Kit settling in? They seem fine, I said, though I hadn't seen Kit since disappearing into my room with Nick. I'm sorry I wasn't more communicative about their visit. I was slightly overwhelmed at the knowledge that I was going to have a child.
It must have come as a shock,
Jessie said gently. Aspen had lost interest in us and had crawled over to her brightly colored playmat.
It doesn't seem like Nick was upset that you found out.
I shook my head. I haven't gotten that sense. He said he wanted to tell me, but that he'd thrown out my number. Asher and Jessie were clearly confused, but Jessie was too polite to dig further. Asher was not, and I was grateful. I needed the guidance on what to tell them. My head so wound up with the weight of the changes the last 24 hours had wrought in my life. Why did he throw out your number? We met when I was checking out that bar up in Nashville where we had a lead that Emerson Womp might be. It was a one-night thing, and I left him my card for if he saw Womp again. It wasn't meant to be anything serious, and I'm not surprised he threw it out. I'm just grateful I stopped by again. Tell us what happened. I gave him the rundown of discovering that I was suddenly a father and inviting Nick and Kit to stay for the week. When I got to that part, Jessie's mouth dropped open in dismay.
They're only here for a week? But I was looking forward to...
Jessie bit his lip.
I'm sorry. That is selfish of me. I am looking forward to having more Omegas and someday Betas in the pack, but that isn't Nick's responsibility. Or yours.
Well, Nick said he doesn't want to be held to only a week. Jessie looked cautiously excited.
Then how long is he staying?
I shrugged helplessly. I don't know. That's one of the things I wanted to talk to you two about. I know last time we talked about it, I wasn't interested in building my own home. But now, I feel as though I need to make that a priority. Show Nick that I can really provide for him and the cub. Jesse reached out and took his hand, and I noticed the pride in Asher's eyes as his mate stepped up, shouldering an equal share of the responsibility of the pack's happiness and health. Of my happiness and health.
Dallas, I doubt Nick needs a house to see what a prize you are.
You don't understand. My voice was deep and rough. I need him to want to stay. I need him. Do you really think we don't understand? Asher asked, his mouth twisting in a wry smile. After I put you all to work fixing up the tiny house and then building an actual one? You didn't put us to work, I grumbled. But I got his point. How soon can we break ground? Asher asked. What? Really? That fast?
This is important to you, Jesse answered, and that means it is important to us.
I cleared my throat. Thank you, Alpha. Omega. Aspen crawled back to us and pushed her little hands against my leg, so I picked her up. If we follow the same plans as this house, we can probably break ground in a week or two, and building should go faster this time since we're more familiar with the process. I think I'd like to wait until just after New Year's, though. I have an idea for next Christmas present. When I didn't say any more, Asher simply nodded. Now, let's talk about this arsonist. Chapter 18. Nick.
I was distracted. I could feel fluctuations in Dallas's mood, which was surprising, given how little time we'd spent together. Was that part of the imprinting? It must be. I just hadn't expected it to be so clear and so strong. I might not have noticed it if Kurt had been watching a Hallmark movie, but he was watching one of those gritty police procedurals. The yearning and happiness I sensed was definitely not a reaction to the television. What was he talking to Asher about? The emotions I felt from him seemed to echo my own when I had been talking to Kit. Could he be talking about me? What was Asher telling him? I hoped it was something like,
You better not and claim that Omega hard and fast before he slips out of your clutches.
Not that I was going to, but if Dallas was ready for that kind of commitment, I was all about getting that show on the road.
Do you want me to put something else on?
Kurt asked. What? I'd been so wrapped up in my thoughts about Dallas, I might as well have been on a different planet. Kurt gestured to the television.
You don't seem to be enjoying it. I can change it.
No, sorry, I was just thinking. Kurt nodded and went back to his silence, and I turned my bartender's gaze on him. Being a bartender was one part waiter, one part bouncer, and 3 parts therapist. You learned how to read people. The silent ones were sometimes easier to read than the loud ones. You can cover a lot of emotion just by being loud. I could read the majority of quiet folks just with their first order: depressed, shy, sad, stressed, antisocial, and, only very occasionally, just content with being quiet. Kurt was definitely content with being quiet, but he wasn't that simple. Maybe a little antisocial. With his styled hair, his leather jacket, black jeans, and white t-shirt, there was a definite don't give a fuck air about him. Maybe it was because he was a cat, I realized. Yeah, that was definitely a huge part of it. He reminded me of a gray alley tabby my sister had semi-adopted for a while. He was an asshole, and he didn't care who knew it. He went his way, and if you didn't like it, he didn't give a damn. Kurt definitely had that air about him.
I can feel you thinking too hard from all the way over here,
Kurt said.
Don't hurt yourself.
Yep, definitely an asshole. How did you end up here? I asked, the bartender therapist rising to the top. Step 1, get people talking about themselves.
I drove,
Kurt answered, not playing along. Thank you, Mr. Literal. 2 could play, or not play. I meant, how did you end up as part of this pack? You don't really seem the type. That got his attention, if for a moment.
Oh, what exactly do you think my type is?
You're a loner.
Oh, really? You get that from your book on stereotypes, Mr. Personality Test?
Kurt's look and tone were more dismissive than harsh. Nope. I smiled. He couldn't deter me. I'd made customers 10 times sillier than him smile. I got it from your eyes. He snorted and looked back at the television.
Yeah, whatever.
But really, why hook up with a pack?
You're nosy.
I'm a fox. We tend to be that way. Also, trained since birth in the art of short-sheeting beds. And that's just the start of it. I've got a third-degree black belt in prank juju. That got a real laugh out of him.
You're all right, Fox. I'm not telling you shit, but you're all right.
Fair enough. I'll tell you something, though. If I'm actually paying attention to the TV, we've got to change the channel. How do you feel about Westerns? He slid a wary look out of the corner of his eyes.
Wayne or Eastwood?
Wayne, all the way. Kurt shook his head with disappointment.
I should have known you couldn't trust a fox. Eastwood, all the way.
I should have figured. He's just as much of an asshole as you are.
And Wayne isn't?
Kurt was flipping through the channels. He's grumpy, I clarified. Not an asshole. He'd yell at kids to get off his lawn, maybe brandish a cane at them. But Eastwood would just shoot them.
At their feet, maybe. Just to scare them.
I spread my hands. You're making my point for me. Kurt stopped on a channel and brought up the info. They call me Trinity.
Can we settle on Terrence Hill as neutral ground?
He asked with a raised eyebrow. Terrence Hill is acceptable, I agreed, and settled in to actually pay attention to the movie, pushing the distraction of Dallas's emotions from my mind. Chapter 19. Dallas.
Even though Nick had told me he didn't want to leave at the end of the week, my bear was on edge until the end of that week had come and gone. Both Kid and Nick slid easily into the daily patterns of the pack. Kid had taken over breakfasts at the bachelor pad, now that Ryan was in his own place and both spent the majority of their day with Jesse and Aspen. Jesse had loaded me up with baby books, which Nick had been ecstatic about. We had fallen in the habit of curling up in bed after dinner while Nick shared the highlights of what he'd read that day, and then I'd distract him with sex. After which, we might join the others in the living room for a movie, or just fall asleep. I was on the road a lot during the day, pounding the pavement looking for Womp. At least Asher kept me closer to home. I didn't go farther than Nashville. It was frustrating, covering the same ground we'd covered before with no new insight. But if this guy was targeting shifters, if he was stealing kids, it made it extremely personal to me. And somehow, in the days leading up to Christmas, I still managed to find time to work on my surprise for Nick, as well as purchase gifts for the rest of the pack. Aspen was easy, as was Jesse, but I had to enlist Nick's help for the rest. You're sure on the John Wayne DVDs for Kurt. I've only ever seen him watch those crime shows unless someone's already picked them out. Nick's smile was absolutely gleeful.
Trust me, he'll love them.
I shrugged and took his word for it. The two had struck up a strange friendship that seemed entirely built on insults, and even after working with the guy for close to 5 years, it was clear Nick had come to know him better in a couple weeks than I ever had. Ryan got some kind of giant pot thing for cooking. Simon got the most ridiculous knitted winter hat I'd ever seen, with tassels sticking up in a row like a mohawk. And Asher got an ebook reader. I'd gone a little overboard with Aspen, with clothes and toys and blankets. For Jesse, I'd gone a little crazy with the scrapbooking supplies, which I was fairly certain Asher would make me pay for. But I'd been watching paper goods slowly pop up on Jesse's Pinterest boards for the last few months. That was easy. Is that everything? I asked Nick, completely shopped out, even though Nick had sped through the stores like the Tasmanian devil.
All done,
Nick assured me. Thankfully, we'd been able to complete the majority of our shopping in Columbia. I'd had to go up to Brentwood for Jesse's presents, and I'd been buying stuff for Aspen for months. As we piled back into my car for the drive back home, I finally approached the question that had been digging at my mind for the past few days. All of our talk and plans had been about the pack's Christmas, and Nick had joined in wholeheartedly, as had Kit. But what about their family? So, are you planning on sticking around for all of Christmas? Nick pressed his lips together and took a deep breath.
I've been thinking about that.
And my knuckles were white on the steering wheel.
I feel like I have to go home for Christmas, at least for part of the day.
I flexed my fingers. Part of the day wasn't bad. Are you sure? You don't want to go back for the evening or the day?
I'm having a really hard time getting over the way they treated me when I told them about the pregnancy. I'd known they were going to take it hard, but I hadn't expected them to be that bad.
They are your family, though. Nick turned to face me, leaning his cheek against the back of the seat.
What about you? Where's your family?
I was raised by my grandparents, and they've both passed.
I'm sorry.
Nick said. He slid one hand over my arm, and I let go of the steering wheel to hold his hand.
What happened to your parents?
Dad was a single Omega. My father took off when I was about 2. I guess he had this whole other family on the side. I got at least 3 half-siblings out there that I've never met. Dad didn't handle it well. I don't remember any of it because I was living with my grandparents by the time I was 4. But they just told me Dad had died. I didn't realize until I was older that he'd committed suicide.
Oh, shit.
Nick squeezed my hand. Yeah, at first I was mad at my grandparents for not telling me. I found out when I was 21. But they really did the best thing. It would have really messed me up as a kid. I don't know exactly what I would have thought, but even as an adult, I had to deal with the thoughts that my dad hated me so much he left me, or that I just wasn't enough. I was able to shake that pretty quickly because I did have my grandparents who loved me and never made any secret about it. But I don't think I could have reasoned through that very well as a kid.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? About what kind of life you want for your kid.
Nick settled back into his chair again. Yeah, it does. I agreed. I know I've said this before, but I'm really glad you came home with me. You didn't have to tell me the truth, that this was my baby.
What? And miss out on your amazing foot massages? I'm just using you for the pregnancy support.
Nick's smile was mischievous as always. Well, I'm not just using you for the sex, I said, feeling the sudden need to make sure he knew how much I appreciated him. And I don't want you here just because of the baby. I dared a glance at Nick as he wiped at his eyes. What? Did I say something wrong?
No, you said something very right. Just ignore me. I'm a basket of hormones lately.
I can never ignore you, I assured him, my bear pushing me to make it better.
Dallas, you need to shut up right now, or I'm going to have a full-out ball fest right here. And you don't have any tissues.
But you're not sad or upset.
I'm not sad or upset, you big bear. But if you want to make me feel better, you can take me home and boss me around.
My bear liked that. I loved how well Nick complimented me. So sassy in public, so submissive in private. Well, I was the complete opposite, gentle and easygoing on the surface, but completely domineering in bed. I was glad Nick was sticking around for Christmas. I was going to lay everything out for him and hope for the best. But first, I had to get my Omega home and take care of him. That plan was foiled, however, because as soon as I was within range, I felt Asher's agitation. What's wrong? One of the local rogues contacted us. He's a firefighter, and they just got called out to a house fire of a hawk family they know out here. He says it's going to take them 10 minutes to get there, but we can get there in 2 if we hurry. If it's so far out, how did they know? I hit the gas pedal, and Nick looked at me with concern. The Omega managed to escape with one of the kids, but said their other child wasn't in her bed. The Alpha went in to look, but that's all I know. I didn't have to ask if he thought it might be our arsonist. Where is the house? Asher told me, and I slammed the brakes, pulling over on the side of the road, leaving Nick confused. You know how to get back to the house, right?
Yes, but
I was already stripping. the cold December air biting against my skin. There's a fire, and it's closer from here than from the house. Just get home quickly. I shifted and told Asher I was on my way. Chapter 20. Nick.
I was shaken by Dallas's abrupt departure, but I could feel his adrenaline and determination as he ran through the woods. He wasn't scared, but he was concerned, and he was very angry. I hurried home as safely as I dared. The last thing I wanted to do was get in an accident. Instead of heading to the double wide, I went right to Jesse and Asher's house. Jesse opened the door before I knocked and welcomed me in. Kid had already beat me there. "What's going on?" All Dallas said was that there was a fire. Aspen was on Jesse's shoulder, asleep, and he patted her back as we sat in the living room. Asher got a call from a local rogue who was on the firefighting. I don't even know what they're called. Team? Squad? Just go with, he's a firefighter, Kid advised. The fire is at another local shifter's house, and part of the family got out, but the alpha went back in after a missing kid. Oh, shit. I clutched my stomach protectively. I hadn't even met our child yet, and the notion of losing him or her terrified me to my very bones. To make things worse, Asher is worried it might be this Skip they've been tracking, a coyote shifter arsonist. He targets shifter families with kids. No one has survived until now, but one body is always missing. My stomach churned. One of the kids? Jesse nodded. I couldn't imagine a child being in the hands of someone who had murdered their entire family. It was bad enough when your parents rejected you, like mine had. But to be torn away from them? I really didn't know which was worse. The revulsion and anger twisted inside me until it rose up, a physical force inside me. I sprinted for the bathroom, the urge too sudden to warn Jesse or Kit. I made it to the toilet in time, but only just. Jesse was waiting with a wet cloth when I was done and a glass of orange juice. Sip, swish, and spit. I find it clears out the taste better than water. But don't drink it. That's just acid on top of acid, and it will burn like a motherfucker. I did as he suggested and cleaned my face with the cloth. Sorry. It's not a big deal. Did you have much morning sickness in your first trimester? I nodded. Yeah, it was pretty vile. It just about disappeared before we came here, though. I had some during my first pregnancy. I haven't seen any signs of it yet, so hopefully I've lucked out this time. But it's still early. I tilted my head. This time? Did Dallas not tell you? Jesse looked to the ceiling in exasperation. Alphas. We told him the day you arrived. I didn't want to overshadow you and Kit. And we thought Christmas would be a nice time to tell everyone, if they don't figure it out before then. My excitement pushed any remnants of the nausea away. How far along are you? Only a couple weeks. Wow, so early? How did you know you were pregnant? Jesse offered his hand to pull me up. Casper can sense these kinds of things pretty early. That's the big guy with the scar? Jesse smiled. Kind of intimidating, isn't he? You can say that again. How did he get the big scar across his face? I followed Jesse into the kitchen past Kit and Aspen. I've never asked, Jesse said. And he's not a big talker. Tea? Please. I helped by pulling out mugs for Kit, Jesse, and me while he got the water started. Are you worried? About Asher going to the fire and possibly running into the arsonist? Absolutely. But it's a fear I've had to accept every time he goes out after a skip. You keep saying skip. What does that mean? Oh, it's their target, a guy who's skipped bail. That made sense. I added 2 spoons of sugar to my cup and got the cream out of the fridge. Most of the time it's not dangerous, right? Dallas had never said anything about the job being dangerous. I just thought they went out searching until they found who they were looking for and then called the cops. More dangerous than Asher will admit, Jesse sighed. They all think they're almost invincible because they're shifters and most of the skips are not. But I've seen them come home with broken limbs, cuts. Sometimes they won't tell me how they got hurt. I wish they would. I'm certain that whatever my brain comes up with is worse than the reality. That was exactly how I was feeling. my mind conjuring up image after image of what could be happening to Dallas right now at that fire. I tried to push the gruesome images away. Stress wasn't good for me, and it certainly wasn't good for the baby. So, what do you do to deal with it? Jesse lifted his mug with a wry smile. I drink a lot of tea. I wish I believed in some deity I could pray to, but it's just us in this big, dangerous world. I trust that Aspen won't endanger himself unnecessarily and that the guys will protect him as fiercely as he protects them. That's all we can do. I felt just as helpless as before, but perhaps less alone. That wasn't nothing.
Chapter 21. Dallas. I could feel Nick's confusion, but as I sensed him moving back to the house, my concern for him faded, leaving me focused on the fire somewhere in front of me. The rest of the pack was on their way, but I had been significantly closer. When we had first moved into this area, we had met as many of the other local shifters as we could, making sure we wouldn't be stepping on any toes. This Hawk family lived on the top of a hill, which was definitely straining my muscles, but the adrenaline pushed me through it. I could see the glow of the fire shortly, long before I reached the house. The bright orange and yellow stark in the swiftly darkening evening, flashing between the bare trees. I put on a last burst of speed as I neared the house, bursting from the tree line in a sudden rush, right behind the young Omega holding his son. He startled, his face streaked with tears, and I quickly shifted into human form. "Is your mate still in there?"
He is,
the Omega yelled over the roar of the fire, which already covered the entire top floor.
"And our 7-year-old.
Fuck. Asher was going to kick my ass for this, but I couldn't do anything else before doing my best to rescue them both. "Do you have an outdoor pump?" The Omega ran and I followed. The water was icy cold and painful, but even so, I wished I had clothes on to hold that cold closer to my body for longer. "I'll be right back. Is there an open door?" The Omega pointed to the back door and I sprinted. I couldn't spare a single second. The smoke was heavy and I ducked down. My bear would have been lower and my fur held more water, but I probably wouldn't have fit. And if I did find the alpha or the child, I wouldn't be able to carry them. I didn't have much time. The heat and smoke were intense. I grabbed a towel off the oven handle and ducked it in a bowl of dirty water in the sink. There was no time to be picky. I held it to my face and it helped me breathe through the smoke. I ran through the living room, but it was equally empty. I found the alpha laying at the bottom of the stairs, though. The fire was crawling down the walls of the stairs, and something crashed with a giant plume of sparks, landing on me and the alpha, bright pinpricks of pain on my skin. I was nearly out of time. I tied the wet cloth around my head and threw the alpha into a fireman's hold and tried the front door. It was locked. I didn't have time. I'd have to make it back through the living room and kitchen. Halfway through the living room, there was an ominous creak. I froze instinctively, and as the creak grew louder, I scurried backward, nearly throwing myself over a coffee table as the ceiling came crashing down. Move. Move. I needed to move. I had lost my hold on the alpha and was laying on my side, my legs twisted on top of the coffee table, staring at the giant wall of flames that blocked the path to the kitchen. Up. Up. I forced myself up, feeling the heat crisping my skin. I grabbed the alpha again. He'd been thrown back toward the front door and ran full force at the giant glass window in the front of the room. I jumped right through it, shattering the window first with my free shoulder and then with the rest of my body. Glass shards sliced through the skin on my head and my legs, and I fell to the grass outside, landing without grace. The air snatched from my body as I hit the ground with a solid thump. Hands were on me in seconds, pulling me up and away from the house. I saw Kurt grab the Hawk Alpha, and they pulled us to safety. I groped at the wet rag covering my mouth and nose, needing free-flowing air. Ryan, who had pulled me away from the house, helped me untie it. I lay gasping, my limbs weak. When I caught my breath, I turned to check on the Alpha. "Is he okay?" Kurt turned to me, his expression unreadable as he shook his head. "No," I croaked. I crawled over and placed my fingers on his neck. Nothing. I collapsed backward as the Omega ran up and fell against his mate's chest. I couldn't stay here and listen to his sobs. I lurched to my feet. What are the others doing?
They're searching out scents,
Ryan answered. One of us should stay with him, I said, nodding at the newly widowed Omega. Surprisingly, it was Kurt who said, I will. It was a relief to shift into my bear, to fade into his black and white senses of right and wrong. My bear didn't care that I had failed, only that I had tried. In his eyes, that was enough. Any luck? I asked Asher. I'm afraid so, he answered cryptically. I traced his scent and quickly found the trail that he and Simon were following. It was a coyote, all right, and fresh. Underneath his scent was the faded, mixed scent of the family. But the scent of one young hawk was as bright and fresh as the coyote. There was something else. Something strong and fresh that tingled like mint. But I had no idea what it was. You're injured, Asher said, nosing my leg. It hurt where he pushed, and I winced. I'll be fine until we get home.
Definitely the skip,
Simon said, padding back to us from the woods.
I hit some four-wheeler tracks and it faded, though. We're too far behind to catch him now.
Our ears perked up at the sound of sirens in the distance. We'll trace the trail in daylight. For now, we need to make ourselves scarce. Simon and I will run home and grab clothes, then come back and deal with things. The rest of you, keep an eye on things from a distance. Simon and Asher took off immediately while Ryan and I hurried back to the Omega and Kurt. Kurt was holding the 3-year-old while the Omega cried on top of his dead mate's body. Kurt, we've got to hide. Not all of the firefighters are shifters. We can't just leave them, Kurt growled. We won't, I promised, wondering where this sudden burst of empathy was coming from. I shifted so that I could speak and leaned down to pull the Omega up, ignoring Kurt's growl. I'm sorry, sir. What's your name?
Benjamin,
he managed to get out between sobs. Benjamin, we need to hide now, but we'll be right here in the shadows. You need to take your son, okay? He needs you. Benjamin whipped around, perhaps suddenly realizing that, in his grief, he had forgotten his son. The terrified child nearly leapt out of Kurt's arms into his dad's. They both looked so lost and broken. We'll be right here, and our alpha will be back soon to help you with the humans. Benjamin nodded, stroking his son's hair.
I can't. Evan shouldn't see his father like this.
His eyes darted around, too overwhelmed to make a decision. You should go to your car, Kurt said in a soft voice I had never heard before. You'll be safe from the wind that way. The firefighters will have blankets for you. Benjamin nodded and headed numbly to the parked cars. I hoped they didn't lock them at night, but we didn't have time to stick around. Either way, the fire truck would be here soon, and someone would take care of them. Kurt immediately trailed the Omega, though he stuck to the shadows of the woods, so I didn't fuss at him. Ryan and I stayed closer to the house, simply waiting. As the cold seeped in and the adrenaline wore off, I began to feel the extent of my injuries. Everything ached, and my right side felt too warm. I'd probably gotten a little singed, but it didn't feel like anything that wouldn't heal up in a week or two. I hadn't seen Casper, I realized, and the big bear was hard to miss. Perhaps Asher had told him to stay behind with our Omegas. That would be a good plan going forward, knowing there was a family-burning child stealer on the loose. The burning house seemed to tilt before me. Was the whole thing going over? I heard Ryan whispering my name frantically, but it was as if from far away, or like a dream. The fire of the house faded, and I wondered how the firefighters had put it out so quickly. I hadn't even realized they'd arrived.
Chapter 22. Nick. Asher was just running out the door again when I felt my sense of Dallas fade suddenly. Dallas! Asher froze and whipped around to me.
What happened?
I don't know. I could feel him and now I can't. Asher's face tightened.
You're right. I can feel him, but it's faint. Ryan says he's fainted, and there's a lot of blood.
I jumped out of my chair. I'm coming with you, I demanded. Asher blocked me and grabbed my shoulders, gently pushing me back into the room.
No, you're not. If only for the fact that we can't fit you in the truck on the way back. Between Simon, me, and the Omega, we'll be full, and there's no way in hell I'm letting anyone, especially a pregnant Omega, sit in the cold air in the back of the truck.
I'll take Dallas's car, I said stubbornly.
Nick, please.
Asher said, and I could feel his authority as alpha press down on me.
Stay. If Dallas comes to and believes that you're in any danger, he will probably hurt himself and maybe others.
He was right. I stepped back, reluctantly.
Do you know where Casper is?
Asher asked Jesse. Jesse shook his head. But you know him. He's probably needed somewhere else more.
It's just damned inconvenient for us. We need
a doctor, a female voice said from the open door.
Meredith,
Asher said in evident relief.
Let me guess. Casper sent for you?
Meredith removed an old-fashioned velvet cloak as she walked in. Who else?
Where is he?
Meredith pointed outside. He's waiting for you. Asher paused to give Jesse one last kiss and disappeared out the door.
We'll be back soon.
The door closed behind him, leaving us in the sudden absence of purpose. But Jesse fixed that soon enough. I'm going to make more tea, and then, Meredith, you tell us what we need to do to get ready for their return. After we had cleared the living room floor and placed clean, flat sheets on its surface, Meredith had laid out some of her supplies, and then we were left with nothing to do but wait. Again. Jesse had put Aspen to sleep before Asher had arrived, and it felt like we were back at square one. Except this time, it was worse. I knew Dallas was injured, but I couldn't do anything about it. So, Meredith, you're a doctor? Kid asked. An Artrian, actually, Meredith corrected. I wrapped my fingers tighter around my mug. What is that? You're probably more familiar with the idea of druids. We're a similar society. She was my midwife, Jesse chimed in. Well, is my midwife again. Meredith smiled at Jesse, and I was impressed by how little anxiety she seemed to have over the expected injuries. Casper told me. Congratulations, life carrier. She turned to me. I hear you are expecting as well? If you plan on staying with the pack for a while, I would be honored to witness your path as well. She touched her heart and her head in a manner similar to the Catholics, but didn't cross her shoulders. Thank you. I've been seeing my cousin's cousin, but it would be nice to have someone closer as well, just in case. I did need to schedule my second visit soon. It will be a joy to assist you and your son however I can. I placed my hand on my stomach. Oh, we don't know if it's a boy or girl yet, I said. Meredith's eyes crinkled in a smile. But I do. You are carrying a male kit. That's something your fancy electronics can't tell you. I shot a glance at Jessie. Is she for real? Meredith joined Jessie in laughter, unoffended. She's completely real, Jessie assured me. I wouldn't see anyone else, even if I didn't have a phobia of doctors and doctors' offices. You said Artrians are a society? Kit jumped in. What does that mean? We are a people bound by our gifts and a belief in a certain way of living, of balance and of peace, of healing in whatever forms it may require. Are you a religion? Kit's eyes were wide with curiosity. We do the work of the goddess, but we do not worship her. Any one of us could become the goddess, or one of her many companions. You've never told me all of this, Jessie said, leaning forward. Meredith took a sip of her tea. You've never asked. The conversation had effectively distracted us for a few moments, but when we heard the crunch of gravel, everyone popped to their feet. I was out the door before anyone else had moved. Simon grabbed me halfway to the truck. Hold on, Foxy. Your apple will be okay. Just let us get him into the house, okay? Casper appeared out of the night and helped Ryan carry my mate into the house. They were the only two big enough to do it, I realized, and I wondered how they had gotten him in the truck to begin with if Casper had stayed here. I followed them, my heart dropping at the amount of blood staining my alpha's skin. They settled him on the sheets in the living room, and I dropped to his side and clutched his hand. We're just going to get him cleaned up to start, Meredith told me gently as the other alphas backed off. I spared them a glance and realized they had brought a young man and a child with them, but I dismissed them, returning my entire focus to Dallas. As Meredith cleaned away the blood, I realized the injuries weren't as bad as I had feared. He had a lot of cuts, some of them deep, and patches of his skin were bright pink and blistered with burns, but I could see he was already healing. He'd simply be in a lot of pain. Meredith placed one hand on Dallas's head and murmured something I couldn't hear, and I felt the muscles in his hand relax. "What did you do?" I asked. We were alone in the living room now. Everyone else had gone into the kitchen or upstairs to give Meredith the space to work without distraction. I simply eased his pain. The last thing I need is an angry bear swinging at me while I try to stitch him up. Only 3 cuts were deep enough to require stitches, 2 on his leg and 1 on his shoulder. He's going to feel stiff for a few days, maybe a week, Meredith said as she put away her needle and thread. I helped her pull a sheet over Dallas's body. I'm going to give you an extraction to give him. It will take the pain away. It's equivalent to the white coat physician's oxycodone, and he will need iron. You can pick some up in the vitamin section of the grocery store, but the best source is through his diet. If you can get him to eat dark leafy greens, do it. But knowing these carnivores, he'll want meat, and lots of it. Cook it in an iron skillet for max iron value. But he'll be fine? I asked anxiously. He'll be okay. Meredith wrapped me in a hug. Do let me know if I can assist you in any way. Casper knows how to find me. She went to bid her farewells to Jesse and Asher, and then she was gone. Are we just leaving him here on the floor? I asked the couple when they came back into the living room.
It's probably the best option,
Asher said.
We can cover him with a quilt. If you'd like, you can sleep on the couch, Nick, if you don't want to go back to your room. I'd offer the spare room, but we've already put Benjamin and his son there.
The couch is fine, I said quickly. I didn't want to be any farther from Dallas than I needed. We'll get you set up then, Jesse said. Kit's already gone back to the other house, and we sent the guys away as soon as we knew Dallas was going to be okay. Thank you so much for everything. Jesse wrapped me in a hug. I was getting a surplus of them this evening, and said, Dallas is family. Your family, Nick. This is what family does. I thought I was going to lay awake deeper into the night, but the day had apparently taken its toll on me, and no sooner had I turned out the light than I was asleep.
Chapter 23. Dallas. I woke with the full knowledge that I wasn't where I was supposed to be. The floor was hard and cold below me, and my muscles screamed as I sat up. I was in Asher and Jesse's home, I realized quickly. A look around revealed Nick sleeping on the couch close by. I looked down and was startled to see the red gashes lining my arms. There were a few on my chest, but not nearly as bad as my left shoulder and arm. As if they'd been simply waiting for my acknowledgement, they started burning sharply and immediately making me aware of similar feelings along my legs. I lifted the blanket to reveal similar patterns on them. That's what I got for jumping through a glass window. Better than being burned alive, that was for sure. I crawled over to Nick and nuzzled my face into his chest, relishing the comfort of his lemon scent. Nick groaned and his eyes flew open suddenly. He scrambled and would have fallen off the couch if I hadn't caught him.
You're okay,
he breathed. I'm okay, more or less.
Meredith said you would be, but it was hard to believe completely until you woke up.
Well, here I am. I tried to spread my arms and winced. Is there any reason we can't go back to my bed?
No one said anything about it.
Better to ask forgiveness than permission, then. I knotted the sheet around my waist and slung the comforter around my shoulders. I'm already dreading the cold. Let's go quickly.
Don't you want to put real clothes on?
Nick eyed my garb skeptically. Nope. Now come on. I scooped him up and strode to the door. You'll have to open it. My hands are full. Nick laughed but managed to open it and close it behind us, even if I had to move a little awkwardly. I had planned on running across the yard, but my cuts yelled at the first stride, so I had to content myself with shuffling quickly. I set Nick down once we were safely inside the double wide and shook myself. Brrr.
Let's hurry back to bed so I can warm you up,
Nick suggested. That sounded like an excellent idea. We crawled into bed, and Nick diligently tucked the blankets around us, curling tightly against me on my less injured side.
I was so scared when you passed out,
Nick said. You felt that? Nick nodded.
I imprinted on you. I think. Maybe. I've never had it happen before, so I'm not sure.
I shifted a little so I could look into his eyes. I know I imprinted on you. I'm not sure exactly when, but I realized it that morning I woke up before we came here.
Why didn't you tell me?
Nick asked. Really? You think it would have been a good idea to tell the guy you accidentally knocked up? Hey, I think I imprinted on you, so now I want you to be my baby daddy and my mate. Nick's head popped up.
You want me to be your mate?
Damn it. I just had to go opening my big mouth and spoiling things. Well, yeah, but
I accept.
Nick interrupted me before I could continue. I blinked my eyes in surprise. You do?
Of course,
Nick said.
If I hadn't already known that before, last night would have cinched it. I can't imagine a day without you in it, let alone a life.
But I don't have a home for you and the baby. Outside of this room, I don't have anything of my own, other than my car. Nick climbed on top of me and perched his chin in his hands, his arms braced on my chest.
Are you kidding? This is an amazing home. A home isn't a house, Dallas. A home is people. A house is a roof and four walls. A house can be empty when it's full of people. A home is always full.
My bear rumbled in agreement, and Nick smiled.
Oh,
He said,
I have a secret to share with you. We're having a little boy, and he's a kid.
His eyes sparkled with excitement. How did you find that out?
Meredith.
That made sense. Ever since Casper had brought her by to tend to Jesse during his pregnancy, she'd become our main healer. No one other than Casper knew how to find her, which was frustrating, but somehow she'd always managed to turn up when needed. If the system wasn't broke, don't fix it. What do you mean by we're having a kid? We're going to have a clone of your cousin? Nick laughed.
No, a kid is a baby fox.
So your aunt and uncle basically named Kit Baby? That sent Nick into a fit of hysterical laughter.
No,
He finally managed to say.
it's a nickname. She's the baby of the cousins, so we always called her that because her real name is just terrible.
What is it? He had piqued my curiosity. Nick shook his head, still laughing.
I can't. She'll kill me.
Please? When he shook his head again, I pulled out the big guns. Aren't you supposed to tell your mate everything? That did it. His eyes went soft, but then lit with that mischievous grin I love so much.
It's Geraldine.
I winced. Kid is definitely better,
You can't let on that you know.
he warned.
She'll kill us both.
I make no promises. I mind spoke to Nick for the first time, relishing the shiver of his body against mine at the intimacy. At least, not where Geraldine is concerned.
You're a terrible man.
Nick reprimanded me. You're terrible, man. Now, let's get to sleep. As our breathing slowed, Nick asked me one last question.
Dallas, when do you want to?
Consummate the mating? Nick nodded, and I could feel that strange shyness that came over him sometimes. The one that made my bear rise up and want to dominate him. But right now, I was content to simply enjoy his presence, and I was in too much pain for much else anyway. When I'm healed, I promised, and I held him until he fell asleep. And then I followed.
Chapter 24. Nick. We broke the news about me staying for good to Kit first. Not that it surprised her. Then we told Asher and Jesse, who were equally unsurprised, before sharing it with the group at large. I still felt a little unsettled, having made the decision to bind myself to Dallas forever, but having not done the deed. Was this how humans felt? Waiting months between engagement and wedding? I suddenly understood the urge to fly to Vegas over a weekend to get married by Fat Elvis in a drive-through chapel. The week was busy, though. It was the week before Christmas, and Asher still had the other guys running around, following leads and research regarding the arsonist. But with Benjamin staying with us, we kept those discussions quiet. The man was mourning the loss of both his son and his mate, and that wasn't going to heal anytime soon. Dallas had told me about his son being taken, and that Asher had told Benjamin everything they knew about the arsonist the morning after the fire. But outside of that, we tried to focus on the happy parts of Christmas. Evan was too young to understand what had happened to his brother and father, but he understood that his dad was sad, and that talking about them made his dad even sadder. The kid was too young to have to face that weight of responsibility, but that is what fate and Emerson Womp had thrust upon him. I would be happy to see Womp pay someday. Christmas was everything I had imagined and more. When Kurt opened his John Wayne box set from Dallas, he looked directly at me. "Children," I warned. "Look, you," he mouthed, sending me into a fit of giggles. I didn't bother explaining to Dallas. His look of utter confusion was too adorable. I wasn't surprised that every single member of the pack had found the time to buy a present for Evan and his dad, even on such short notice. Benjamin looked ready to break apart at the slightest breeze, so we did our best to take attention off of him. But we wanted him to know he had a place here. I wanted him to feel as welcomed as I had been when I had arrived just a few weeks ago. After our early dinner, Asher stood and clapped his hands for our attention.
"We've got a surprise for the children tonight, so the alphas are going to go prep for it. We'll be back in just a bit."
Dallas squeezed my hands as he left with the other men. I looked over at Jesse. "Surprise? What surprise?" Jesse leaned over to stage whisper, "I think we're getting a hayride." Evan perked up. "What's a hayride?" Jesse leaned forward and bopped his nose. "It's a surprise. You'll see in just a few minutes." I had to laugh when I saw our hayride. The guys had lined the edges of Asher's truck bed with hay all right, and they pulled us up into the bed with them. It was a tight fit, but that made it a little easier to handle the cold bite of the night winter air. "Are we going somewhere special?" I asked Dallas.
"We're staying on the property," he replied. "Just a little ride for fun."
Simon started in on Christmas carols after that. I sang just as loud as anyone, leaning into the warmth of my alpha. I couldn't help but wonder when he would finally declare he was healed enough. Would it be tonight? We hadn't exchanged Christmas gifts yet. I was saving mine for when we were alone. I wasn't sure if he had one for me or not.
"Here we are,"
Simon declared, breaking the caroling. I looked around to see trees decorated with white Christmas lights. "Oh, this is so pretty." Dallas wrapped his hands around me.
"Do you like it?"
"It reminds me of the streets in Nashville during Christmas, but better. No nasty salt everywhere. No concrete. No metal."
"It's ours,"
Dallas said quietly. I turned to see his face in the dim light of the Christmas lights. "Ours? What do you mean?"
"This is where I'm going to break ground after New Year's to build our home. I wanted to surprise you with it to convince you to stay with me, but apparently you didn't need as much convincing as I thought."
Tears pricked at my eyes. "You dweeb. I told you. A house is just a house." He ducked his head and gave me a kiss.
"Yeah, but by that time I already had plans to build the house, so I figured I'd go ahead and do it anyway, and then the three of us could make it a home."
He pressed his hand to the general vicinity of my belly, but I was bundled up like an Eskimo, so he kind of missed. But it was cute anyway. Someone's getting laid tonight, Simon mumbled in a sing-song voice. He wasn't wrong.
Might as well drop us directly off at the double wide, Asher.
Dallas yelled to our driver, making me blush. I didn't care how much he made me blush, as long as he took me home and followed through on the promises his eyes were making. We got out of the truck to a chorus of good-natured ribbing, and I was thankful everyone else decided to go back to Asher and Jesse's house for some hot cocoa. Nothing was going to stop me from claiming my man tonight at this point, but I definitely preferred knowing everyone was out of hearing range. Dallas pulled me along silently and willingly to our room. Once he had closed the door, he pulled me into his arms and joined his hands together behind my lower back. He leaned down and kissed me slowly, meltingly, warming my cold nose and fingers and toes from the inside out.
Are you ready to make us official?
He asked when he broke the kiss. Abso-fucking-lutely, I breathed. Dallas released his grip behind me, and I jumped when he slapped my ass, not suspecting it at all.
Language,
He warned.
you're about to be a dad. You have to be an example.
The twinkle in his eyes belied his stern tone, but that tone went straight to my cock. I wanted more of it. I cast my eyes down, knowing what the submissive posture would do to him. Yes, Alpha. Dallas's hand went to the back of my neck and gripped hard, pulling me close.
Fuck, Nick. The things you do to me.
I debated on whether I should harass him for his language. If I did, he'd spank me again. And I definitely wanted that. I glanced up at him from under my eyelashes. Now who needs to watch their language? The flash in his eyes was exactly what I was expecting and hoping for.
What did you say, Nick?
I looked back down, shivering at his tone, but he grabbed my chin and forced me to look him in the eyes.
Tell me what you said.
I held back a moan. I said, now who needs to watch their language? Dallas shook his head as if in disappointment, but his smile was warm and excited.
Someone is getting too big for their britches tonight. Off with them. The shirt, too.
Yes, sir. I was naked and waiting before Dallas had even finished taking off his winter jacket. He removed his clothing with painful precision, watching my eyes follow his fingers as he unbuttoned each button on his shirt, then slowly stretched out of it and dropped it on the floor. I stepped forward to help with his pants, but he pushed me back.
I don't think you've earned the right to help me undress. And now you've stepped out of line again, moving without permission. I don't think it's fair to let you watch me finish undressing. Lie on the bed, on your stomach, face down.
But Dallas was by my side with a sharp slap to my ass before I could finish that thought. I fell against him, my legs going weak from the pleasure, and he rubbed the sting away from my skin.
Are you going to argue some more?
No, Alpha, I whispered.
Good.
He kissed my hair.
Now get on the bed.
I did, missing the satin of my own bedspread. I wondered if I could convince Dallas to buy one. The cool fabric would feel so good against my hot skin right now. Not that I would have noticed it the moment Dallas returned to taking off his clothes. All I could hear were the sounds of fabric and buttons and zippers. Fuck. How damn long did it take to remove one pair of pants and a pair of boxers? Was he taking them off and putting them back on again just to torture and confuse me? Finally, I felt his skin on mine again when he started massaging my foot.
Good boy,
He murmured, making me flush with pleasure.
I like rewarding you when you obey me. Don't you like it when I reward you?
Yes, but the last word slipped out before I could rein it in. Dallas's hand stilled.
But what?
But I want more. Please? Dallas's hands glided up my legs and thighs to rest right under the crease of my buttocks.
What do you want more of?
You, Alpha. I want more of you. He leaned forward, and I could feel his breath against the skin on my ass.
But how do you want more? Be specific.
He knew exactly what he was doing with his mouth so close to my ass. I wiggled, but his hands pressed me into the mattress, suppressing my movements. I want you to eat me out.
Do you think you deserve such a gift?
Fuck. Did I? I knew I wanted it, but I'd been teasing him earlier, knowing he would get all growly and dominant. His hands massaged my legs, reminding me that he was waiting for an answer. I don't know, I gasped.
Good answer.
Dallas rumbled.
Not cocky and not falsely humble. That definitely deserves a present.
He leaned forward and pressed his tongue into my seam, pressing my cheeks together to make more of a valley for him to tongue fuck without actually touching my hole. I wanted him to dive deeper so bad. I wanted his tongue in me, eating me out. I rocked back into his touch, but he was in too much control for me to alter my situation.
Is this not enough?
He asked, as my rocking grew frantic. You're always enough, I responded, playing the good boy this time. I just want more. Dallas rubbed his hands over my back and ass.
Someone has been a very good boy this year, I think.
Suddenly he stretched my cheeks and dove in, his tongue plunging into me, his stubble scraping against my tender skin, driving squeaks of overwhelmed pleasure out of me. When he'd had his fill and left me almost a rag doll underneath him, Dallas pulled me close and flipped me over, hovering over me so he could look into my eyes.
You haven't given me my present yet.
I was dazed already and confused at the sudden non sequitur. What?
My present. I don't think it's really fair for me to keep giving if you're not giving anything in return.
His smile was wicked. Had he found my present already somehow? He couldn't have. I had it wrapped up before I left the store. In my sock drawer, I said. Dallas quirked his eyebrow, and I wondered if he was going to make me go get it, which would be problematic, given the state he'd put me in. But he stepped away to grab it himself, then placed it on my stomach and began to unwrap it. He started by carefully slicing every piece of tape, leaving the paper as intact as possible. Every time he turned the present to reach a new piece of tape, the pull of the paper on my stomach made my cock twitch. Once the tape was managed, he carefully unfolded it, but let the paper fall away to the floor and kept the cardboard box on my stomach as he opened it. He pulled out 2 clips attached by a silver chain.
What is this?
He twisted the chains this way and that.
Fancy chip clips?
You could use it for that, but I'd much rather you use them on my nipples. Understanding brightened in his eyes.
Really? We've never talked about these. Have you used them before? Do you like them?
I blushed. I haven't tried them, but I figured that I love it so much when you bite my nipples. Dallas leaned forward to nuzzle my neck, inhaling the scent concentrated in the gland there.
I like the way you think. Are you okay with using them tonight?
I wouldn't have gotten them for Christmas if I wasn't intending to use them, I quipped. Dallas's eyebrows twitched.
Careful, Nick. You don't want to get too snippy.
My head dropped back as all the blood rushed to my dick. Maybe I did want to get too snippy. Maybe I wanted to. Oh! I let out a moan that surprised even me when Dallas clipped the first clamp around my nipple.
So far so good,
he murmured, placing the other one more slowly, building the anticipation now that I was expecting it. He twirled the metal around my nipple before placing it. If anything, my moan was louder this time. Dallas tugged on the chains, playing me like a musical instrument.
These are definitely a winner,
he said.
You chose well, my pet. This definitely deserves a reward.
His hand trailed between my legs. His fingers spread, pushing my legs farther apart. I relaxed, anticipating his magical fingers. But instead, Dallas surprised me, taking his huge cock and shoving it into me in one go, halfway in, and then held still. Fuck. It hurt so good. I loved it when Dallas took just a little more than my body thought it could bear, showing me I could always handle more than I thought it could. Normally, he would massage my chest and legs while he waited for my body to adjust, maybe rock a tiny bit. But tonight, The only thing he did was tug on the chains to the nipple clamps in a steady rhythm. The two sensations warred in my mind. I kept splitting my attention between the burn in my ass and the pinch on my nipples. After a moment or two, he did start thrusting, slow and steady, somehow keeping his perfect rhythm on the chains while stroking slowly inside me. I loved feeling like I was his toy, both to use and to please. I loved giving control over to him in the bedroom, to only him, submitting to him in a way I'd never done to anyone before. I told him how he felt inside me, how distracting the nipple clamps were, how good they hurt. He slowly sped up, silently. His only encouragement to keep talking, the quicker movement inside me, urging me to keep on. A silent promise that I would find ecstasy in him if I would just keep talking. I lost track of where my mouth was going. I could hear myself speaking as if from a distance, but my whole world was wrapped up in the sensations Dallas was giving me. I was so close. The tension coiling in me, pulling all of my energy into the tightening of my balls, drawing up into my core. I recognized my voice telling Dallas I was going to come. And then there was a new pain, a glorious pain, as his teeth tore into my skin, marking me, claiming me. My teeth elongated instinctually, and I bit him back. As my teeth sunk in, the sensations, the emotions intensified. The claiming wrapped around us, binding our senses together as one, and, in the moment, I couldn't tell where my pleasure ended and his began as I felt him fill me with his seed and his knot. I felt it both as the receiver and the giver. Felt the glory of being one soul in two bodies. That feeling didn't fade when our bodies collapsed. His knot pressed deep inside of me, binding us together physically for a little while longer. Dallas. I didn't have words to share the love I felt for him right now, but I didn't need to. He felt it. He simply answered with my name, Nick, and wrapped me tightly in his arms, shifting a little to pull the blankets up around us.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas indeed.
Chapter 25. Dallas. Our house had gone much faster than Asher and Jesse's house. We'd learned so much that first time, and we'd worked like crazy, even hiring some contractors in when we were too busy chasing leads about Womp. We still took on the occasional bounty, but most of our time and energy was tied up in chasing him. He'd hit 2 more families in the last 4 months, and none had survived. It had become infinitely more real, having Benjamin and Evan living with the pack. Yet we somehow managed to get the house ready for move-in 1 month before the baby was due, which was any day now. I was sticking close to home, afraid I'd miss it if I went too far. I could already tell our baby was as mischievous as Kit was. I'd only felt him move twice. It was like every time he sensed it was my hand on Nick's stomach, he stopped. Everyone else got to feel him on a regular basis, even Kurt. But he was absolutely cantankerous when it came to me. Like right now, I can't feel him. You swear he's moving? Nick made a face.
Oh, Braxton Hicks. I can't feel him right now either. My belly is too tight.
I wish he'd just hurry up and get out here, I complained.
You and me both.
The timer went off for the oven, and I made Nick sit back down. I got it. You don't need to be bending down in your condition.
I can do anything I damn well please,
Nick growled, which was meant to be intimidating, but was just damn cute.
But I don't please to do that. So carry on.
I pulled the pie from the oven and set it on the cooling rack he'd prepared. Now that we don't have to worry about that, how about I give you a little foot rub? Nick kicked his feet up eagerly.
I won't say no to that.
Now that we were in our own place, Nick didn't hold back his moans when I rubbed his feet. The noises he made revved me up like nothing else, and foot rubs almost always ended up in bed with more intimate massages. You know, I said, pressing down on a particularly tense spot, I've heard that sex is supposed to make the baby come quicker. Nick laughed, even though I'd been saying that at least once a day for the last week.
Don't make me laugh. You made me pee.
Sounds like a personal problem to me, I said. Nick laughed again, then perked up like something had kicked him. What's up? I asked immediately.
I don't think that was pee. I think my water just broke.
Asher. I immediately sent out a panicked call. Nick's water just broke. I could tell he heard me, felt his attention on me momentarily, and then he responded. Casper says Meredith is already on her way. What do I do until she gets here? I was relieved to hear she was on her way, but it didn't ease my sudden anxiety much. Jesse says to get Nick comfortable and put a towel under him. He's coming over now. Can you stand up? I asked Nick.
It'll make a mess.
Nick said bashfully. That's okay. We can clean it up later. Jesse says for you to get comfortable and sit on a towel. Jesse arrived before Nick got settled in, so the two of them retreated to the bathroom while I waited anxiously in the living room. When they came back out, Nick was wrapped in a fuzzy bathrobe. I jumped to my feet and Nick gave me an indulgent look, ruined by a brief wince.
Dallas, can you make some tea?
Jesse said as he helped Nick get situated. Of course, I hurried to do so, catching Jesse's quiet comment to Nick about keeping me busy. Even if that was all the tea was good for, I was grateful to be doing something. Jesse made small talk, easing the time while we waited for Meredith. It probably wasn't more than 20 minutes before Meredith arrived, but it felt like an eternity to me. She sent me to boil water while she sat and talked to Jesse and Nick.
It will still be a while before the baby decides to arrive,
She said.
The best thing to do right now is to try and take your mind off of things. Watch TV, listen to music or a podcast, whatever it is that interests you. I made Asher watch the Home Improvement channel.
Jesse smiled.
If you can sleep, that is also an excellent option. I don't think I could sleep right now,
Nick said.
I'm too excited.
Meredith patted his hand.
That's completely normal. When will I have to, start pushing?
Nick rubbed the fabric on his thighs nervously.
Your body will let you know,
Meredith said.
but don't worry. I will be here to help you listen.
7 hours later, leaning against the bed in the midst of an intense contraction, Nick finally yelled.
Is it time to push now? You can push any time you feel like,
Meredith said.
Just bear down with your entire body. It might feel like you're trying to poop, but that's completely natural.
Nick seemed beyond caring about any sense of propriety. The belt of his bathrobe was still loosely tied around his waist, but the bottom gaped open as he squatted, giving in to his natural instincts and letting his body take over. He reached out blindly for my hand, and I gave it to him. Jesse took his other hand, and we supported him as he bore down with the primal growl. Meredith crouched in front of him and reached up to check on the baby's positioning between his legs.
He's so close to crowning,
She said.
One more push, Nick. You can do it. I know I can do it,
Nick growled between breaths.
This baby is coming out now, and I don't need a frizzy-haired earth witch telling me something I already know.
I looked at Meredith to see if she was offended by Nick's comment, but she simply smiled as if she was amused.
It's not the worst thing I've been called,
She said.
but seriously, one more push.
It was a few more pushes than that, and Nick called her worse names, but she seemed unfazed, and within minutes, our little boy took his first breath. It took a surprisingly long time for everything else to wrap up, with Nick delivering the afterbirth and Jesse cleaning Patrick up. But finally, Nick was ensconced in our bed, our little boy on his chest, and the rest of us gazing at them with wonder.
The whole process is so magical,
Jesse said, rubbing his own swollen belly. Only a couple months more and there would be another baby in the pack. That would bring us up to 4, including Evan, the little hawk. I personally thought the whole process was rather disgusting, but the end result was definitely magical.
I don't know if I could be as helpful as you were, Jesse,
Nick said.
The very thought of going through this again makes me want to scream.
Jesse shrugged.
I just enjoy the whole process, It's not exactly pleasant, no, but it's an easy price to pay.
Nick and I both looked at him skeptically.
I've been talking to Meredith about training under her as a doula. Maybe someday a midwife like her.
I was more on Nick's side in this discussion. Maybe we'd feel different about the birthing process when we'd had time to forget the pain he'd just gone through. But right now, another kid was the last thing on my mind. You would definitely make a good midwife, I said. You'd probably make a good doula, too, if I knew what that was,
It's basically what he did today.
Meredith said.
An emotional support for both parents during the birthing process.
Then you definitely make a good one of those. I yawned. I was exhausted. I could only imagine a portion of what Nick must feel right now. Meredith, as always, seemed to sense what we needed before we said anything.
We'll just finish cleaning up, and then we'll get out of your way. Would you like us to share the news with the others? Or would you like to keep that for yourself?
I shared a look with Nick just to make sure and said, "Please, tell them. I know they're waiting anxiously." Finally, I was alone with my mate and my son. I crawled into bed and laid my head on Nick's shoulder, staring at the beautiful tiny creature he had brought into this world. I can't believe he's finally here,
I can.
Nick said with tired sarcasm.
It took him so damn long to get here.
Patrick finished eating and his tiny mouth gaped open as he snuggled up against Nick's chest. Can I hold him? I held my hands out for my son.
Of course.
Nick gently handed me the tiny bundle and arranged my arms just so. He looked even tinier in my thick arms. I feel like I'm going to break him, I said. Nick snuggled against my arm now and reached out to rub a finger against Patrick's cheek.
You won't,
He said.
but he does seem so fragile.
At that moment, I thought of Benjamin and his son Evan, and his missing son, who he had not been able to find a trace of since the fire. The last 6 months had been frustratingly futile in the search for Emerson Wamp. There had been no fires in the last 6 months that stunk of his pattern. No signs of him, electronic or otherwise, that we'd been able to sniff out. Holding my baby boy made the horror of what Benjamin must be facing all too real. I didn't want to remind Nick of the tragedy, but I vowed to myself that I would find Benjamin's missing son, and so help me, if any other child were taken under our watch. The next time, it could be my family. It could be my child. And I would never let that happen.
Epilogue.
Asher made me take a whole month off to be with my mate and child. The need to find and capture the arsonist was a constant burning coal in my belly. Every day, I lived in the fear that today would be the day he came after someone I loved. The month passed quickly, though, and I enjoyed every second of it. If it hadn't been for the arsonist, I would have taken longer. But this morning was my first morning back, and Asher held an all-pack meeting with all the members present, not just the alphas. I was surprised to see Meredith and a human man also in attendance. I nodded my greeting, but took my place without questioning them. "Glad to see you finally decided to stop slacking," Asher said. I graced him with a withering glare, but it just made him laugh. "Thank you everyone for coming. Casper and I have been in deep conversation over the last few days, and we wanted to speak with everyone." Asher gestured toward Casper, who stood and met each person's gaze briefly. "You are all familiar with Meredith, and I would like to introduce Elder Talon. He is one of the leaders of Meredith's society. Ever since the night of the fire that brought Benjamin to us, I have been searching for the arsonist, for his place in the paths." Casper paused as if waiting for response or deliberating his next words. Of course, it was Simon the Impatient who spoke before Casper continued.
What the hell are you talking about? Casper is a seer. It is an honorable gift, and I still cannot understand why he feels the need to hide it from you, his pack, and family.
Meredith glared at Casper with a look that indicated that this was a long-held disagreement between the two of them.
Peace, Meredith. Talon held his arm out before her. We do not know Casper's path. The rest of the world is not so accepting of the gifts as we are.
He nodded to Casper while Meredith ducked her head in acquiescence. Casper seemed unfazed by their disagreement. As I have told our Alpha, I hesitate to meddle in the paths of others, but it has become inevitable. Even though I must act, however, I don't always know when or how I should. I do not see everything. The visions come as they will, not as I will. And you are right, Elder Talon. The world is rarely kind to gifted souls, though few are as manipulative and vile as the man we have been seeking, the man who took your child, Benjamin, because he was gifted. Casper looked at Benjamin with a heavy expectation, but Benjamin looked away. Were you aware of your son's gift? Asher asked.
I suspected. Liam has always been very empathetic, but he's our first. I just thought I was being an overly proud parent seeing a uniqueness that wasn't there.
Casper waited until Benjamin met his eyes again. Liam is very unique, as are the rest of the children under Emerson Womp's control. I believe the reason we have not found traces of him the last few months is not because he has gone into hiding, or because he has stopped burning homes and taking children, but because the authorities can no longer tell that the fires are unnatural. The official report on Benjamin's house couldn't determine the origin of the fire, Kurt said, speaking up for the first time. Casper nodded. Emerson Womp has found himself a phoenix in the youth of his cycle, who has not yet come into the knowledge of who he is. Simon scoffed.
Phoenix are just a myth. Next thing you know, you'll be telling us that unicorns are hiding in our woods.
Casper found Simon in disappointment. It would be better for all of us if they were only myths. The ancients are returning, and if we do not save the young phoenix, it will spell our doom. Casper's pronouncement fell with dark and heavy certainty on the room. Asher stood to face Casper. I think the time for secrecy is coming to an end, Asher said. Ignorance will do us more harm than anything else right now. Casper met his Alpha's eyes and nodded. That is why I invited Elder Talon to this meeting. The trade-ins have more knowledge than any other human about the ancients and the danger they carry with them. I pulled Nick and Patrick close, feeling the burden that had been upon me since his birth increased tenfold. Elder Talon, what do we need to know? Asher spread his hands in supplication before the older man. Elder Talon sighed.
I had begun to hope that this day would not come in my lifetime. Taravan must be laughing at me. I will begin with as simple a story as I can. But the knowledge that we need to fight the coming war is held by no human mind. Our library is but a small portion of the knowledge of our society. But we will join you and share whatever it is we have to ensure the future for our children.
He gazed fondly but sadly over the gathered children and infants. Let us begin now, Asher said, taking his seat. I looked around at the pack I had come to call family. I would do anything for them. I would do everything for my mate and child. I only hoped that it would not come to that.
Acceptance for His Omega, The Outcast Chronicles, Book 2. Written by Krista Crown and Harper B. Cole. Narrated by Kenneth Obi for Falcon Sound Company. Copyright 2017 and 2018 by Krista Crown and Harper B. Cole. Production copyright 2018 by Krista Crown and Harper B. Cole.
Ta-da!